appointed by the Secretary of State to examine the plan. A reminder, please, for everyone to switch the mobile phones, laptops, etc., to silent mode. Oops, never mind. I wouldn't bother trying to crawl underneath and getting it. I don't think there's any fire alarm tests planned today, so if the alarm does go off, we will need to evacuate the building in an orderly fashion following the green emergency exit signs, which I think is that door there or that door there. Ian Kemp, the programme officer, is not around today, but he can be contacted by phone or email if you need to, or if you've got any sort of procedural queries about the venue, have a word with the council, one of the council officers in the first instance. The agenda for today was published last week. This is an additional hearing session to those that were originally programmed to discuss various modifications proposed by the council in response to action points that I published following the last hearing session in June. A revised agenda was published on Friday, and that altered the running order a little bit of the sites that we're going to discuss today. So hopefully you've got that. Essentially, it moved the Pinson's Lane site up to the top of the list of the sites that we're going to discuss shortly. The issues that we're going to talk about on those sites are essentially those that were covered by my questions published in August, 21st of August, my SQ 713 to SQ 23. So, and some of you obviously have written statements in response to those, which I've read. Just one correction on the revised agenda. I don't think we've published a second revised, but on the very last bullet point where it refers to housing land supply for the plan period, it should state 2023 to 2041, not 2024 to 2041. But I think the questions that I posed in writing, the SQs did refer to the correct dates. Hopefully that hasn't caused too much confusion. So we'll probably have a break around 11 o'clock this morning. And assuming we won't be finishing before lunch, we'll probably break for lunch about 1 o'clock. Just a reminder for those who haven't been here before, or those that have that may have forgotten, the purpose of the examination is to help me decide if the plan submitted in March 2023 is legally compliant and sound, and if not, how it could be modified to ensure that it is. So as in previous sessions, I will start each agenda item with some questions to the council. When we've heard the responses to those, I'll invite contributions from others. When you wish to speak, if you could put your nameplate up on its end, and I will bring you in at an appropriate time. And when I invite you to speak, if you could turn the microphone on by pressing the button on the console in front of you and say who you are and if appropriate, who you represent. You probably need to make sure the microphone is reasonably close and not pointing up too high. It's pointing sort of towards your face. If you could remember that I've read all the written statements, so there's no need for those to be read out or for people to quote from those. Rather, when I ask you to contribute, if you could respond to the specific questions I'm asking today or indeed points made by others. And generally, each time you speak, it shouldn't be for more than a couple of minutes or so. You will have a chance to make further contributions if you wish to respond to another question or point. So don't feel you've got to just sort of say everything you want to say in one go. And I'll give the council an opportunity to sum up their position at the end of each agenda item before we move on to the next. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to go around the table, if I could, and ask people to introduce themselves. And then once we've done that, I'll ask Olivia Bailey MP if she'd like to make a statement before we move on to the individual sites and other items on the agenda. So I will go around the table now so that everyone's aware who's here and who will be participating today. So if I could start with the council first, please.
Thank you. Good morning. Emmeline Lambert, barrister for the council.
Good morning. Lila Bassett, West Berkshire Council.
Paula Amarelli, West Berkshire Council.
Sarah Conlon, West Berkshire Council.
Cheryl Willett, West Berkshire Council.
Paul Goddard, West Berkshire Council, Highways.
Rachel Lancaster, West Berkshire Council.
Jan Donovan, representing Regency Homes.
Tim Burden from Turley on behalf of Donington New Homes.
Atul Hindocha, representing myself.
So, Joe Laurie, Safe Vincent's Hill Group.
Clive Taylor, representing Tilehurst Parish Council.
Olivia Bailey MP, representing Reading West and Mid Berkshire.
Paula Saunderson, Clay Hill Ward, Flood and Drainage Warden, member of the Lambourne Valley Flood Forum for the lower reaches, and I live in North Newbury.
Thank you. Catherine Miles from Provision, representing TA Fisher.
Thank you. Paul Bryant from Shawcombe Donington Parish Council.
Bernard Clark, representing Coldash Parish Council.
Morning, sir. Mike Bodkin, Pinson's Lane, or more properly, UNI Pinson's Lane Limited.
Thank you, sir. Councillor Simon Pike, Thatcham Town Council.
Sir, Roger Tustain, Nexus Planning on behalf of Crowdace Homes. Sir, I have a colleague, John Russell from Motion Transport. Initially, we thought we might need some transport input into this session, so he may step in if questions come up on transport.
Okay, that's fine. Thank you.
Morning, sir. Adam Ross from Nexus Planning, acting on behalf of the landowner, land north of Pangbourne Hill, Pangbourne, which is site PAN 08.
Good morning, Rob Davis, Gerald Eve, on behalf of the Fairhurst Estate.
Good morning, Matthew Spry from Lichfields, representing the North East Thatcham Partnership. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and welcome all. So just before I ask Olivia Bailey to make a statement, are there any procedural questions that people wish to raise before we move on? No, okay. Okay, Olivia Bailey, welcome, and please have a what you wish to say to me. And if you wish to say, as long as you want to, you can see with the items on the agenda, but if you wish to leave once you've finished saying what you wish to say, that's fine as well, so I'll leave it up to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today, and thank you to everybody here for being here, and to all of the staff at West Berkshire Council for their work on the plan, and to you for your work on the plan. First of all, you know, I just want to put on the record that we do desperately need more affordable homes. And my starting point is we've got to find the right places and the right ways to build those homes. And I want to work collaboratively with the council to do that. But I'm here today because of overwhelming public concern about the Pinson's proposed development, or proposed inclusion of Pinson's Hill in the local plan, as a consequence of the failure to put sufficient housing in the plan in the first place. And I just want to say three brief things. So I'm going to explain why local residents and I believe it to be an unsuitable site. I want to express my concerns with the process that has led us to this point before I want to share a few suggestions on the way forward. So first of all, colleagues here who have been campaigning on Pinson's Hill and saving Pinson's Hill for a long time will say much more eloquently than I the concerns with the site. But I will just outline the three concerns that the public have and have raised with me. First of all, in Tilehurst, we have had a lot of building on our green spaces, and there are very few green spaces left. Pinson's Hill is extremely valuable habitat for wildlife. It's an extremely valuable place for local people to walk and be with nature, and it is a really valued asset for the local community. And given we have lost so much of our green space over recent decades, it really feels very important to the local community to keep it. Secondly, there's extremely serious concerns about traffic. You know, I myself have had issues in the IKEA car park. People have been trapped in the IKEA car park for hours. You know, it's at junction 12 of the M4. It's a single track lane down Pinson's Lane. I really struggle to see how the traffic could be managed in a suitable way for a development on the site without causing significant disruption to local residents. And I think I understand also that in response to the questions raised to you, the council did say that they would set out a revised assessment of traffic, but I'm yet to be able to see what that says. And finally, on infrastructure. You know, we are, our GP surgeries are struggling, and people are struggling to get appointments. Our local schools are struggling. Calcott Juniors, Calcott Infants, for example, have been waiting for a new school building for a long time. And there are real concerns about the additional pressure on infrastructure that could be caused in this very specific site. Moving on to process concerns, I mentioned at the start, I think that we are only here today discussing Pinson's Hill because there was a failure by previous administrations of the council to explore sufficient sites. And because you have identified a shortage of housing in the plan, there was now no option other than to include unsuitable sites in the plan, which seems to me to be a very, very strange and unfortunate state of affairs. You know, Pinson's Hill as a site has been rejected on 6 previous occasions. It's been seen to be unsuitable for all the reasons that I've outlined. And, you know, to be told that the only reason it's now being included is because they have to, because people previously didn't explore enough sites, seems to me to be very strange. And, you know, frankly, we need to explore more sites. And I would strongly urge for the ability to properly explore additional sites rather than rushing to put unsuitable sites into this plan, especially given the new housing requirements from the government, which will mean and necessitate the council immediately has to get to work to identify new sites anyway. So in my view, it'd be preferable to do that all together. And I think, you know, I think that it's also worth saying I appreciate in my constituency, the vast majority of the geographical land of my constituency is in a national landscape. And so I understand the implications of that for where the housing has been built, but certainly my residents in Tilehurst feel like we've taken an awful lot of housing and feel certainly that sometimes that feels like it's come out of political convenience. And we know that there are villages and places across the constituency where people would like to see more homes built. We need smaller developments to sustain our villages. We're losing our village pubs and our village shops. And, you know, the council have told me that they also share the desire to have smaller developments right the way across our constituency. So this is an area that desperately needs more affordable housing. Again, just to repeat that, I recognise the challenges with the large area of national landscape, but there is this appetite for smaller developments. There's also a suggestion that perhaps we could have a new town on the western border of West Berkshire. And so I would like to ask you to consider pausing at this point and giving West Berkshire Council the opportunity to properly explore additional sites that are suitable. And I would strongly oppose the inclusion of Pinson's Hill in the plan moving forward. Thank you.
Do you mind if I ask you a couple of questions? No, okay. In terms of just going back to the traffic, just so I understand what you talked about, the terrible problems that can arise in the IKEA car park, and I can sympathise with that. It seems typical of IKEA, doesn't it, to be in these locations with these very car-borne trade. Anyway, just to be clear, where you see the problem for the additional traffic that would come from a residential development of 130 or so homes. My understanding of the arrangements, we'll talk about this in detail as we need to later when we go through the site and the various issues. But my understanding is that the policy suggests that the development would be served by the cars coming down Pinson's Lane, and that would then enter into the road system that serves IKEA car park and the other retail units, etc. there, and feed back out onto the roundabout and onto the A4 and the M4, whatever. So your concern is the extra traffic is not so much, is it on Pinson's Lane itself? Bearing in mind it wouldn't be going up the lane, it would be going down the lane into the system that I've just described, or is it just the sheer extra quantity of traffic on the already overcrowded system that's serving as
it is both.
Okay.
And I think Joan and Clive will talk about this in more detail, living locally to the area later on. But it is both. And you know, driving around the area regularly as I do, I really struggle to see how it would tolerate the additional traffic. Just the road infrastructure is not suitable.
Yeah, well, obviously there would be additional traffic on that bottom part of Pinson's Lane because at the moment it's limited, I guess. And obviously 130 on houses would bring more traffic on there. So there's that issue. So it's both those issues. It's the lane itself, the bottom part of the lane itself, and the system in the retail park. Okay. In terms of process, I think what you're suggesting is that, well, let's just be clear what you are suggesting. You've referred to the need for the council to embark on finding more sites through a fair and comprehensive process. I assume what you mean by that is not in this plan, but a revised plan. Yes, in the.
So as I understand it,
Yeah.
there's going to need to be, from what's been explained to me by the council, there will need to be almost immediately an opportunity to go back to find additional sites through a proper process. As I understand it, the only reason that Pinson's Hill has been included in the local plan is because insufficient sites were found in the previous, when the plan was created. Rather than rushing to put an unsuitable site in the plan, my proposal would be that, you know, the need for this additional housing rolls over. I don't know how that works in the processes of a plan, but I would much significantly prefer that we have the opportunity to explore additional sites to see if the housing need can be met elsewhere before having to include Pinson's Hill in the plan.
Understood. And you also referred to the council having a higher housing target in the future. I think you're probably alluding to the new government's new standard method and what that figure is. That's sort of lurking in the background to all this. I'm aware of that. And it is, my understanding of what it is, it's significantly higher than what the figure is that we're working to in this plan. So just to be, I think what I'm hearing you suggest, and correct me if I'm misinterpreting, is that this plan should be finished and adopted with the housing supply that it identifies as submitted, even if that is deficient against what the current requirement is. Get that plan in place, and then the council will inevitably have to start looking at a new plan with more housing land, and that would give the opportunity to start afresh and comprehensively rather than adding these additional 4 sites, and in particular this one at this stage. I think, is that what you're saying?
Broadly, I think, you know, to be clear, my concern is specifically about the Pinson's Hill side.
Yeah.
And I'm also really clear that we do need additional homes and we need affordable homes. That's absolutely clear. And so we need to find the sites. My concern is that Pinson's Hill is not a suitable site, and that, you know, as far as I can see, the best way forward to identify the homes that we need that are in suitable locations would be to do as you described, whether that's across the board or specifically in the case of Pinson's Hill.
In terms of affordable housing, I think I'm right in saying that the requirement for this site would be provide 40% of the 130 odd homes as affordable. So it would make a significant contribution to providing affordable homes.
I mean, absolutely, like affordable homes are really important, but I think that doesn't mitigate against the concerns that my constituents have about the suitability of the site.
Okay. Well, just to take one step back as well, when I issued my note after the hearing sessions in June, I did say, and I'll just remind people again, I haven't yet reached a conclusion about what the level of housing supply in this plan needs to be for me to mind it sound. And I didn't suggest any particular sites being added. I asked the council to go away and think about what they would suggest, and they've suggested 4 additional allocations on the basis of their assessment that they are in fact suitable, notwithstanding the concerns that I'm sure they're very aware of that you and others have raised. Anyway, so thank you for that contribution. As I say, you're very welcome to stay now, or if you wish to leave, I'm sure you have other important business to attend to. I'll leave it up to you. Yeah, okay, that's fine. Thank you. Right. Is there anything that the council wishes to say at this stage in response to that? Because we're going to come on to talk about this site. So do you want to just pick up any issues there and deal with it as we've been through the full discussion? Yeah. Okay, fine. Okay, well, as you can see on the agenda, before we move into the individual sites, I just wanted to take a step back and just think about where we've got to, and it's been raised by Olivia Bailey there. The situation that we've got is that one of the modifications to the plan was to amend it, to modify the plan period and amend the housing requirement. So the housing requirement that I'm working with is for at least 9,270 additional dwellings between 2023 and 2041. So that's what the plan ought to be trying to find land for. And at the end of the hearing sessions in June, the council's own trajectory identified a supply for a total of 8,873 between those dates. So in other words, there was a shortfall in its own assessment of around 400. And there were also doubts in my mind about how many homes could be built on the strategic sites at Sandalford Park and North East Thatcham at that stage, and potentially on Windfall. So I raised those sort of doubts, and therefore stated in my post-hearings note that whilst I had not reached conclusions about the housing land supply, the council should consider how it could be modified to boost the housing land supply. The council's response then in August came up with some suggestions, which we're going to talk about today, 4 additional allocations, one of which we've already mentioned. identification of a broad location for growth to the north of Newbury, which we'll come on to, and an updated housing trajectory. So that's available. Subsequently, I issued supplementary questions for people to respond to those proposals, which I received a number of responses to. And the council, in responding at that stage, published some changes to the detailed wording of the policies relating to the additional allocations. And then on Monday this week, some further tweaks to those were also published. So that's in exam 60. So you've got a version of the policies relating to these 4 additional allocations with yellow and blue highlighting that we'll talk about today when we talk about the details of the sites. We will talk about details of the sites, but we'll also talk about the principle of them and their suitability in general terms as far as people wish to do so. Just a further bit of information that's become available. On the 26th of September, so last week, in response to a request from me, the council submitted 2 further notes. One was exam 57, which responded to issues raised about the Pinson's Lane site, because a number of representations have been accepted by me that raised a number of issues that Olivia Bailey's summarised, and the council's been through those and summarised its position in response to each. So we've got that. There's also exam document 58, which updated the information about a number of sites assumed to contribute towards the housing land supply, essentially based on a statement from Nexus, I think it was, wasn't it? So we've got that as well, where the council's been through each of those sites that have been queried. So just to make sure people have got all that information insofar as they wish to refer to it. Any questions about any of that? I know it's probably a bit confusing for people, a bit confusing for me, but there's been various bits of information that have been brought to the table recently. No, okay. I assume that you've got what you need from that. Okay, so I'm just going to take, as I say, just a refresh for my own purposes and for everyone else, really, just how we've got to where we have. In terms of the site selection methodology, when the plan was prepared, we had a discussion about this, but essentially there was various stages to it. Early on, call for sites, and then a subsequent call for sites, those being assessed through the HELA process that rules some sites out for certain reasons, either technical or locational, for example. It comes back to a point, I suppose, Olivia Bailey made. There was a settlement hierarchy and a spatial strategy. So sites that were not well related to that were discarded, which is a normal sort of plan making process. And then some sites were ruled out for things like inadequate access or flood risk and things like that. So when we went into the beginning of the hearings, I think the council's position essentially was, well, the plan allocates all suitable and available sites that are in the right places that can be developed. And then at the early session, it was accepted by the council that actually things had probably moved on a little bit and there could be some sites that could be reassessed and the council may now consider to be suitable and potentially available. So they were put forward and as they were just identified at that stage. And there were some discussions about them and why others had not been included. And then when I issued my post-hearings note in July, the council looked back at those and put forward these as some of these as potential allocations, which is where we've got to now. So there was a process that had been quite thorough going through assessing the availability and suitability of these sites. Right. There was sustainability appraisal has also been updated to look at the sites. We talked yesterday about that, and if necessary, the appraisal will be updated comprehensively, won't it? I'm looking at Ms. Lancaster because I know she's leading on this. So the appraisal will be updated comprehensively to look at all the proposed modifications. But there's been some work on these already, and that's been published, and people have got that to look at what the appraisal says about these particular sites. Now, I know that some of the statements made to me recently have referred again to emission sites that have not been reassessed as suitable by the council. I'm aware of those. I'm not going to go through those again individually or spend much time on them. So I want to focus on the sites that the council has been put forward now. And as I say, we'll go through each of those individually. So that's just my refresh of the process of where we've got to. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
No, nothing further to add.
No, okay, so that's where we are. Does anyone have any questions about that process? Yes.
Hi.
You are promoting an emission site. What's what I call an emission site.
Yes, I'm
Was assessed in
promoting an
the Healer.
emission site, if
Yeah.
you like.
And I'm aware of what you said about it. Yes.
Thank you. It's the first time I've attended a
Yes, I know.
hearing like this. And I own a site in Thatcham called Newbury Leisure Park. Clearly a brownfield site because it was developed with a number of residential dwellings on it 60 years ago and a leisure complex on it 40 years ago. And for whatever reason, despite several submissions to the process and the methodology, I've found that it actually never gets assessed by the council for this particular site. And it's taken 3 years to get a sort of response from the council regarding why it doesn't get assessed, because from what everybody else can see from this particular site, it's got a very large leisure complex on it, typically 4 stories high. It's tarmac right the way around. It's got parking spaces for over 200 cars. It's got a residential dwelling on it. And it's 4.25 acres. Representations have been made for development, commercial or residential, but clearly the need for residential housing is so great. The question is, what is the harm in converting it to residential? And the response I've got from a methodology point of view is quite interesting. One is it's outside of the settlement boundary. And despite senior managers and executives sort of accepting that the boundary had never been moved 45 years ago when the site was developed, the boundary remains where it is, which is really a long, lower way where the site is. And north of the site, it's all residential. South of the site, there's some residential, some commercial. But for some reason, there's a reluctance to change that settlement boundary. And the second reason is that 22 to 25% of the site is in flood zone 3, but they would disregard the entire site rather than saying, well, actually, there is 75 to 78% of the site that is not impacted by any sort of flood zone risk. So, the site has been vacant and derelict and shut down for 3 or 4 years now since the COVID crisis that we've had. And I fail to understand why there's such a lot of pressure on finding sites, such a lot of pressure on housing. Here is a site that's completely developed, and yet it fails in the process somewhere along the line. And is there an opportunity to consider this a windfall site? Is there an opportunity to reassess? Because those 2 reasons seem very odd to me, and certainly all the residents along that road would prefer use for that site rather than just encouraging crime. And that's what's actually happening on the site. Just keeps being broken into and antisocial behaviour around the site. So just wanted to say that from a methodology point of view, really.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. Well, just one thing I didn't mention, I was going to mention that in June, the council published Exam 32, which summarised for each of these HELA sites, the sites that had been assessed by the council, the reasons why it considered those not to be suitable still. And do you want to do very brief? I don't want to get too bogged down in the detail of this one, but do you want to just remind me? I did look back at it, but just you say in your own words why this one was deemed not to be suitable at the present time.
Yes, so the site has been assessed, and it has the reference THA 21 in the HELA. So this site, it falls within a site that sits within an essential gap between Newbury and Thatcham. And we have the appropriate, it's the West Berkshire Appropriate Countryside Designation Study that kind of identifies that land as kind of being an essential gap between Newbury and Thatcham. So that's really one of the principal reasons why it was not selected for allocation, but also there is significant flood risk on the site.
Okay, yeah, I mean, when you say it's an essential gap, that's actually this area that's designated in the plan and it's subject to policy DM2, is it?
That's
From
correct,
memory,
yes.
Yeah. So that is part of the strategy at the moment in this plan. It's not to say that in a future spatial strategy that could potentially change, but in this plan, that is the fundamental reason. There's a sort of, it's not the detail of it being a brownfield site or it being, I mean, you referred to flood risk, but I mean, it's potential, some sites can have some flood risk, but areas that are higher or not at risk, can't they? So, but I think what you're saying to me is it's the sort of fundamental position of where it is. But at the moment, the council does not wish to see residential development. And I noticed that it's one of a sort of cluster of sites in that location, that Healer sites that that you could pick off individually, or you could say, well, collectively they, you know, they could be developed, but there are reasons why the council does not wish to do so at this stage. Okay, understood. Thank you. Right, I won't. So, thank you. I mean, I had read your representation. I did understand the background, but thank you, and you know, for bringing that to my attention. Is there anything else on the site selection methodology people wish to make any comments about? Yes, Coldash Parish Council. Sorry, Coldash Parish Council.
Yes, yes. I won't go into too much detail, but we went through a very long process of a neighbourhood development plan, coordinating with West Berks very closely, having a referendum in which over 650 people voted. And we came up with a plan, and you've now included in this 3 sites that were not only rejected many times by West Berks over the years, but were not part of our neighbourhood development plan. And suddenly, with no consultation and actually no connection really with us as a parish council, these 3 sites are put in there. I won't go into the dangers. I'll have an opportunity later, presumably, to say why these 3 sites are so would be so appalling to Coldash. But in terms of the selection that you're going through, the question I ask is, where's the law here? We've gone through 7 years of consulting people, of going through the Localism Act, talking to lawyers, indeed, and suddenly these 3 things are plucked and put in with no recourse to the 4,500 people that live in Coldash. 650 who voted. So I'm just trying to get an idea of how that happened, Mr. Fieldhouse. You know, how did that process come to be?
Well, I think we've outlined process from my point of view, where we've got to. Can we come on to the Coldash neighbourhood plan, which I know we've got in the examination library. I've looked at it. I know it was made recently following the referendum in the summer, wasn't it? And I know that you've drawn attention to the fact that the allocation of these sites would be contrary to a particular policy, and there's issues about how the development on that land could affect the gap between Thatcham and Coldash village. So we'll come on to those issues.
But the issue I'm just trying to raise, I'm not sure whether it's a legal issue, a policy issue, but it's certainly a democratic issue. We're not in China, we're not in Russia here. We've gone through a process closely allied with West Berks. Indeed, Layla's been part of it. And, you know, it takes a lot of work, this. I mean, thousands of hours of parishioners' time, as well as a whole referendum. And this is just swatted aside. And that's what I'm trying to get at. I think it's dangerous for democracy. It may even be legally dangerous. We don't know. But what I'm trying to say is it's grossly unfair. What should have happened is we should have been told about this. We should have been able to represent. But above all, someone should have said 7 years ago, don't bother with a neighbourhood development plan, because ultimately they won't take any notice. And there were just so many other country vibes from the chairman of planning on several occasions. No, go for this. So that's really the point, Mr. Fieldhouse. It's like nobody's actually addressing that and saying, well, maybe these sites should be considered at some stage in the future, but to suddenly pluck them out of expediency, I'm not sure it's legally allowed anyway, but that's another issue. It's grossly unfair. And that's And that's what I'll be, it's not about the fact there'll be huge amounts of traffic. If you ask us, we've got loads of alternative places, a bit like Ms. Bailey there. We could give you 101 great places to build, but that process hasn't been allowed.
Okay. No, understood. Well, you've explained that very clearly, and I think it's different, but it's a similar sort of process point, I suppose, to what Olivia Bailey was saying about the introducing sites at this stage of the process, which can happen in local plans. It won't be the first time that I've examined a local plan, but I do understand the concerns that you have. And obviously, ideally, when plans are made by the council that goes through a thorough process, including consultation with parish councils and everyone else, you know, there is that's the process by which decisions are made and sites are allocated. So thank you for explaining that. But we'll come back to it on the particular issue. I understand the process point. I can't say anything. I mean, the council may wish to say there's always a relationship between different levels of plans in an area, but I can understand the particular frustration and concern when you've had a very recently adopted plan that says one thing in a neighbourhood plan, and something happens like this. So.
And no consultation. That's the real point. Yeah. I think that's unlawful. I think that.
Well, on consultation, in addition to this process we're having today, before I finalise my report and recommend to the council how the plan that was submitted back in whenever it was, March last year, I can't remember, May last year, quite a long time ago, there will be a full public consultation on the proposed modifications, which will be an opportunity for everyone to talk about, you know, to make representations about the changes that have been made by the modifications, including any additional allocations. So there will be consultation later before the plan is finalised. Okay. So, but we'll come back to the neighbourhood plan shortly, whilst we've been through the Tilehurst site. Yes, Turley. Oh, nearly another one off the table.
That was close. Thank you, sir. Sorry. I was going to hold fire and raise this in the later section regarding North Newbury, but I do think it probably comes under the site selection process. You'll have seen our submissions, sir, and obviously heard in earlier hearing sessions. Obviously, this plan is predicated on a Newbury focus, and there's a site that the council now agrees in principle that can come forward as part of a future review. The council then have proceeded to propose allocations everywhere else but Newbury. And we're struggling a bit with that, as you will have seen from our submissions, sir, not least because we've sought to engage with the council through the process. You'll have seen the email exchange, and indeed it appears that the transport team have been instructed by the policy team not to engage with us. Transport seems to be the reason that the council isn't pushing this forward as a formal allocation. As you'll have seen, we say it should be an allocation. It should have the same standing as other proposed allocations. And we've purposely not taken umbrage with individual proposed allocations at this stage, as that doesn't seem appropriate. But you have got a significant shortfall in the overall numbers. You have an area that is identified as being acceptable in principle by the council. You have a sustainability appraisal that the council have prepared saying the area is acceptable. There is an array of technical reports that the promoters have put in over a number of years that deal with some of the technical issues. And you've got a situation here, sir, where the site selection process isn't very transparent. And you know, I do have some sympathy with the parish council and other members of the public in that process. The paper trail would suggest that there should be formalised allocations in the principal settlement. And I suppose just to draw this together, sir, you know, I'm mindful of paragraph 23 of the current NPPF, which requires the council to for a plan, and it says should include planning for and allocating sufficient sites to deliver the strategic priorities of the area. That suggests the need for a formal allocation at North Newbury. That's what the NPPF requires to you. That goes to the heart of the soundness of the plan. And I'm sure when we get into wider numbers later today, that will become ever more obvious. Thank you.
Yes. Well, I mean, again, there will be a reason that the council has for not wishing to conclude at this stage that that particular emission site is suitable to such a degree of certainty that it wishes to allocate at this stage. But I understand the process point, and it's a similar one from a slightly different perspective again about the difficulties of adding allocations to a plan during an examination process, which is, I can understand the difficulties associated with that.
Yeah, not to go back and forth on this, I think the difficulty we have is the paper trail doesn't explain why this area is being treated different to other proposed allocations in the plan with similar evidence, similar essay process, etc. in the principal settlement. Sorry, I'm trying not to labour the point, sir, but you'll have seen the communications, you'll have seen the emails back and forth between myself and various officers of the council. If the council is able through you to point me to that rationale, I'd be grateful.
Okay, well, I'll get the council to comment on that, but I mean, I think what I will take is the council's position on these emission sites is set out in exam 32, published in June. Is that where I look for the council's summary of the reasons why the emission sites were categorised as they are?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you want to just very briefly on this one, like you did with the one at Lower Way, Thatcham, just okay. Yeah.
Yeah, so for this one, there were identified highways issues and it's felt there needed to be further work. And so we would undertake, so there needed to be kind of master planning and that would take place through an early review of the plan.
And is that because there is a collection of sites and you'd want to take this as a broad location rather than pick off individual sites, that one of which you could say, well, actually, we may be able to sort out the highways issues on that particular one, but you want to look at it collectively, is that?
It's looking at it collectively, but also I think our highways team identified there would need to be kind of new kind of infrastructure put in, new roads.
So the kind of the extent of it's different from the other 4 additional allocations, which could just be straightforward access of an existing road. This is a bit more of a big project that would take master planning and infrastructure and supporting. So yeah,
that's correct. Yes.
Yeah. So if there are concerns about process of modifying a plan to identify more land at this stage, it comes a point where you can pick off some bits which council say, well, we can actually do that in a fairly straightforward way, whereas this is more of a fundamental project, bigger project that would entail. Yeah. Okay.
Sorry, so I've got to disagree with that because that isn't anywhere in any of the documents. There's 2 points here. One is the council haven't done that work and there's no reason why they couldn't. And indeed, they've actively refused to engage with us. Secondly, we have made submissions throughout to say that our site is capable of coming forward without this wider site. We could go around in circles in this, obviously, sir, and I'm mindful of examination time, but the evidence simply isn't there. The council needs to identify sites now to meet the shortfall they've got. And as I say, this site should be one of those sites.
Okay. Well, I understand the council's point of view. I understand your point of view. I haven't said the council has to identify sufficient sites to meet the revised requirement. I've said I've still got an open mind on that, and I'm going through this process to understand the implications of adding sites at this stage in the plan making process. And one of the options before me is the one I think was outlined by Olivia Bailey right at the start, is to sort of say, well, no, get this plan adopted as it was submitted, subject to the modifications I've already outlined as being necessary. And to accept that the council is going to have to come up with a new plan fairly soon. And I can't remember exactly what the draft transitional arrangements are in the latest draft NPF published in the summer by the new government. But I think it would put this council in a position whereby it would need to embark on a review, an update to a new plan fairly quickly, wouldn't it? You're nodding.
I'll just also add there's information set out in the sustainability appraisal about why that site wasn't taken forward.
Okay, thank you. Right. Paula Sanderson.
Just a couple of points on the process. Newbury Neighbourhood Development Plan was also told that it would be a non-allocating plan, and now the wording has changed in the main modifications. So I think when the consultation on those is put forward, there needs to be quite good clarity about what they can now put into their neighbourhood plan and whether the sites they put in are in the cumulative numbers, because I read the wording and I didn't understand.
Is this the wording of the policy relating to the broad location?
No, this is in relation, I can't remember which one it was. Which one is it? SP1. Wait, the wording's changed to say.
Okay, the process of allocating sites in neighbourhood plans.
Within neighbourhood development plans.
Yes, yeah.
So they would, certain of the neighbourhood development plans which are underway were told they couldn't allocate sites. Now there is wording saying that they can, but we need to be very clear what they can, because obviously some of it's going to be within settlement boundaries, and then where those numbers count. Do they count into the overall numbers or don't they? No. And I raised that point at a forum a few weeks ago, and they agreed, yes, we need clarity on that. And then I do have a point on the north of Newbury.
Well, we'll come on to that later. I mean, my understanding of what this plan says about neighbourhood plans, the only plans that it requires and makes an assumption that there will be additional housing land identified in are the Hungerford and Lambourne ones. Other neighbourhood plans that are coming forward in the future can identify additional land if they wish to do so, both inside and outside settlements, so long as it's consistent with the settlement strategy, etc., of this plan. So that's what this plan says. It doesn't say anything specific about the Newbury plan or make any assumptions about the Newbury neighbourhood plan and what that would allocate or wouldn't, does it?
So it's not compulsory for neighbourhood plans to include allocations, and Newbury has not said that they want to include allocations, so we haven't identified them with a housing requirement.
And if there's any implication for the 1%, but if there's any implication for the Newbury neighbourhood plan of the broad location policy, we can talk about that when we come on to it later today. So, yes.
Sorry, but they were told that they couldn't allocate. And now,
well, that's not what this plan says. I don't know what.
No,
but can we leave it there? Because I mean, whatever's been
we'll
said.
leave it there. I've made the point that clarification is required. The steering committee of the Newbury Neighbourhood Development Plan.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you. Right, okay. I think that was, thank you. I think it was helpful to have that general discussion about the process. So I'm conscious of that. And as I said, I haven't actually come to a conclusion about where we are in terms of the modifications that are required at this stage. In relation to the additional allocations and broad location, etc. So just accept that, but notwithstanding that, I need to go through each site and think about the details and the policy wording for each, in case I do decide that it's necessary to modify the plan to include those allocations. So that said, shall we move on to the first of the sites that are on the agenda? Which is the one that's already been referred to at Pinson's Lane, Till 13, Tilehurst. So we have a policy and a map relating to this site. We also have, that isn't shown on the map, a change to the settlement boundary in this area, don't we? That essentially was proposed earlier on in the examination process that, looking at the wrong one here. Here we go. That would basically, the settlement would include the retail park, but to the south of this allocation. So in effect, the Calcott Tilehurst has one. Tilehurst and Calcott have one settlement boundary, don't they? There's not a gap between them, so it sort of wraps around the commercial area and takes in Calcott and Tilehurst.
That's correct.
Yeah. So this site, this allocation has a red line around it, and the map shows roughly half of it to be built on, the other half to be provided as a community parkland, public open space adjoining the existing recreation ground, and the public footpaths that would go through the residential area and the new open space. So that's that. I've got a few questions to the council, but I know there's quite a lot of issues that people will wish to raise, so I'm going to let them raise them themselves. In terms of just the capacity first, I don't know to what extent there's still agreement or disagreement between the council and the site promoters, but I think the capacity of 138, you say, is based on a sort of the standard approach of a developable area of 6.6 hectares. Yeah, and that's excluding the community parkland and the density of 35 dwellings per hectare and the net developable area. So it's a standard approach. It's not prescribed, but that's the starting point.
Yes, so we've taken the consistent approach for all of our site allocations. And although we know there was a recent planning application for higher, we've kept that consistent approach.
Yeah. Okay. So we know about the concerns raised by Olivia Bailey MP and the various representations. You've looked at all those. I mean, I'm sure you've been through this site many times and had issues raised in the past on planning applications, etc. And you've summarised your response to each there. So I've got that. I'm not going to run through all those. But obviously people can elaborate on those as they wish. In terms of just where we've got to in terms of the extent of agreement, disagreement with the site promoters, a town put forward some detailed suggestions about the map and the policy wording in its statement. You've had some discussion about those, and you've in blue are the additional changes that you've now compared. Are there still any significant outstanding matters with town, or is it basically you've reached agreement?
No, we've reached agreement on the policy wording and the map, apart from the number of dwellings in the policy to be on that site.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. Right, is there anything else you want to say? You obviously heard some initial points about this site. Do you want to just wait and see what issues are raised and then come back and deal with those in due course? Okay. Mr. Goddard's nodding his head, as expecting to be brought in at some point. Right. Who would like to start with outlining any points? I mean, Joan, Laurie, or Tilehurst Parish Council, do you want to? You've obviously heard there's no need to repeat things that people have already said, and Olivia Bailey's obviously outlined very clearly, summarised very clearly the concerns. But the Parish Council, do you want to give me a view?
Yes, I've got a number of points I'd like to raise. I think I introduced myself earlier. I am here representing Tilehurst Parish Council. I think I should add I am also the ward councillor on West Berkshire Council for the Tilehurst Birch Copse ward, which contains this site. Let me start by saying that Tilehurst Parish Council is opposed to the inclusion of this site in the local plan. I will try to explain why and to answer the questions put by the planning inspector. Since 1979, there have been 7 planning applications for residential development at this site. Every one has been refused. 2 were further refused on appeal. In 2011, the Secretary of State said in his report that the site was outside the settlement boundary and within open countryside where policies of restraint applied, and that the proposed development would cause considerable harm. The last planning application was submitted in 2019 and took over 3 years to conclude, with 3 separate consultations taking place during that period. The application generated 3,799 documents, the majority of which were objection letters and emails. Indeed, the planning officer's report states that around 2,750 contributors submitted objections. To put this in some context, I received 700 votes when I was elected to West Berkshire Council in 2023, so 4 times as many people objected to housing at Pinson's Hill than voted for me. I have every reason to believe the same will happen again, so we may face a prolonged planning application process. I should also add that neighbouring parish councils, Holybrook and Thiel, both objected to the last planning application. Two planning committees considered the last application. The Eastern Area Planning Committee voted unanimously to refuse, and then the District Planning Committee considered the same application a few months later and again refused, this time by an overwhelming majority. The applicant did not appeal. I should also add that the then Member of Parliament, Sir Alok Sharma, had stated his intention to call the application into the Secretary of State for yet further consideration should the application have been approved. The key reasons for refusal was that the site sits outside the settlement boundary, as it still does, and secondly, that traffic congestion at some weekends and many bank holidays would severely restrict residents' access to the site, either into it or out of it. One councillor described the site as landlocked on these days. There is only a single road access to this site from the south via Pinson's Lane, which en route to the site goes past a petrol station, a large Sainsbury's supermarket, a 24-hour McDonald's, Boots the Chemist, B&M, a gym, Porsche Cars headquarters, the Dunelm store, a warehouse trading estate, an office business estate, and of course the IKEA store with its multi-storey car park, and also the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service premises. All of these businesses and organisations generate traffic. The situation has and will almost certainly continue to worsen. Since the last planning application approval, since the last planning application for the land east of Pinson's Lane, planning approval has been given for 50 residential care units at the Pinson's Manor Hotel site, immediately opposite the proposed housing site east of Pinson's Lane. With all the extra traffic that will generate for visitors, residents of the 50 units, staff and deliveries. In addition, previously empty office units off Pinson's Lane are now being reoccupied, creating yet further traffic. We then have the housing that is being built in Thiel, whose residents, I would suggest, will add to the number of car visits to the ever-popular IKEA store and the other retail units off Pinson's Lane. Weekend and bank holiday traffic congestion isn't going away. The site will at times be, the proposed site for this development will at times be landlocked. The Tyler settlement boundary was reviewed a few years ago with some minor changes, and it continues to provide protection against inappropriate development at the edge of Tilehurst, where the countryside, where this countryside site meets the national landscape. It also provides a link between other protected areas such as Oliver's Copse, Withy Copse, and corridors through to the ancient woodland at Calcutta Golf Course. There is also the need to protect the equestrian livelihood that this western edge of Tilehurst provides. Furthermore, the settlement boundary maintains a gap with Thiel. I would point out that the proposed development site will effectively create an isolated settlement disconnected from either Calcutta or Tilehurst. And I doubt that the housing design will be in keeping with the rural nature of the housing in the northern section of Pinson's Lane. I will quickly mention some other issues, such as noise from the M4 and the prospect of sealed windows, the impact on wildlife and badgers in particular, trees, the inadequacy of the northern section of Pinson's Lane as an emergency access route due to its gradient bends, single lane, and the frozen streams on the road in winter. Many residents are concerned with infrastructure. GP appointments often take weeks away. And on schools, the closest, Olivia mentioned this earlier, the closest school is the Calcutta schools, and there is a rebuilding project planned there. But I would point out that is to reduce this school from a 3-form entry to a 2-form entry school, which isn't going to help on, in accommodating future schooling needs should this development proceed. Tilehurst Parish Council is in the final stages of developing a neighbourhood development plan, and after public consultation seeks to designate much of the land east of Pinson's Lane as local green space. The land has public rights of way across it and is well used by members of the public living in Tilehurst and Calcutta for walking, running, bird and wildlife watching and relaxation in these stressful times. The Neighbourhood Development Plan is expected to commence Regulation 19 consultation shortly with a referendum in 2025. We would urge that this process be allowed to conclude prior to any inclusion of this site in the local plan. In conclusion, I fear I see history repeating itself. The proposed housing is not that different from that was finally proposed in 2022. Many of the previous grounds for objection remain and indeed have worsened. There will be thousands of objections. I propose that the site is not included in the local plan and that better and more likely to deliver housing options exists elsewhere in West Berkshire. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just remind me on the Tilehurst neighbourhood plan. You say the consultation is going to take place soon under. I don't know. I'm not familiar with the neighbourhood plan regulations, but what process have we got to in terms of the stages of the neighbourhood plan? Sorry, could you put the mic back on? Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, it completed Regulation 14 consultation quite some time ago, and the revised, or if you like, the final version of the local plan was resubmitted to West Berkshire, I think about three or 4 months ago, and we're currently awaiting feedback on that plan. We've had some feedback, though not on the plan itself. And I know from West Berkshire's sort of forecast as to the way in which these plans progress that it's expected that it would go to referendum in 2025.
What I do know is that before there's a referendum, it goes through an examination process.
Yes.
So that's the stage that would be. So the stage that happens now is the council comments on your draft plan.
Yeah.
And then, subject to that, there would be an examination.
You're correct. That examination is yet
meeting the basic conditions.
Yes.
This. Yeah. Okay. And so, okay, understood. Do you want to update? Just to clarify.
Clarity. So, yes. So the Tilehurst neighbourhood plan, it's undergone the pre-submission consultation. The qualifying body have updated the plan and they've asked West Berkshire Council to informally review it. So we're just undertaking that process at the moment. It has been delayed, unfortunately, just because of resourcing in the team and the examination. But once we've provided comments back, obviously they can make any necessary changes, and then it's for the qualifying body to formally submit the plan to West Berkshire Council. We'll undertake a legal compliance check and then undertake the consultation, another round of consultation on the plan. And then following that consultation, it will then undergo independent examination, and subject to how that goes, then referendum.
Okay, so we're at, this isn't the final consultation. This is the version to go to the West Berkshire Council. You can make comments on it and they would be required to amend it accordingly, depending on what your comments are.
So usually what happens is the pre-submission consultation, the qualifying body make any amendments and they formally submit the plan to the local authority, then the local authority undertakes consultation on it. But what's happened here is we're kind of undertaking an informal review of it prior to it being submitted to the local authority.
Yeah, okay. So it could change.
Potentially.
And there could be a disagreement between West Berkshire Council and the emerging neighbourhood plan about how this land is designated.
Yes.
And that would be something that would be tested through the examination? Or...
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Good. And the test of general conformity with the neighbourhood plan would be with the existing course strategy and site allocation plan at this stage?
So recent examinations, the examiners have tended to consider whether the plan is in general conformity with the current development plan policies, but they've also had regard to the local plan review as well.
Because of the need for consistency and working together, etc.
Yes, that's right, yes.
Okay, right, understood. Right, sorry, Tilehurst Parish Council.
I was only going to comment on the local green space designation. I mean, there was an earlier consultation at Regulation 14, and my recollection is that West Berkshire Council didn't raise any specific objections to the inclusion of that LGS at that stage. But I accept you may well come back with revisions, with suggested changes regarding that LGS at Regulation 19.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful for me to understand that process because again, it goes back to the general process of modifying the West Berkshire plan at this stage, having regard to other things that are going on and processes that are going on, including with neighbourhood plans. So thank you for that. Okay, so we've had as I said, we've got a number of representations in writing, which I'm aware of. We've had some very clear expressions of the main concerns from two participants today. Is there anything else, Joan Laurie, is there anything you wish to add to what's been said?
I'm tackling it from another point of view, trying to answer the questions that have been raised. Pinsent Hill, or Turnham's Farm as it used to be known, is a landmark. It states that you've reached Tilehurst and Calcott. It is a rural open countryside landscape, much treasured by the local residents and others passing through. It gives us a sense of place, a sense of belonging. Secondly, I'll try and raise some of the questions raised on SQ 717. You're asking if the parameters for Tilehurst or TIL 13 Pinsent's Lane are justified. No, it's open countryside. It's a landmark with landscape values and contravenes Articles C1, C17 and CR6 and 5 of the Council's own policies. And many, these are spatial. Currently, it also has the protection of a strategic gap status. Even if this is withdrawn, it is still a physical gap between settlements, they can't argue about that, in an open rural tract of countryside, which has its own protections against development. The proposed development will not be addition or an extension to an existing residential development, but an attachment to a commercial one. It is some considerable distance from the existing residential development. It will be out of character to Pinsent's Manor and 3 detached houses with large gardens in Pinsent's Lane, which are traditionally styled homes. The next point that was raised was, would it be effective in ensuring the provision of safe and suitable access for all users? No, it won't. Pinsent's Lane is totally unsuitable for access from City Road for emergency vehicles. I live in Pinsent's Lane. I have a picture of my car tracks in the snow, which totally fill the lane. So the dust carts on bad weather don't even come down that lane. I was isolated for 3 weeks during the winter because there was snow and ice down there. We actually had to walk up the hill to collect the turkey for Christmas because the vehicles couldn't come down. So how on earth are fire brigades vehicles meant to come down, ambulances? All the 3 services have raised concerns, but I can't understand it. Access from the A4 to the Pinsent's Lane becomes blocked and does on a regular basis. One extreme example was for 5 hours where people, if there was a proposed development, couldn't leave their houses or get into them. Another for 3 hours or a couple for 3 hours. And frequently, even now, it takes over an hour or over, especially at bank holiday weekends. But even during the week, somebody said this last week, it took an hour to get out of Sainsbury's car park onto the A4. So one of the councillors actually said there was a queue of 70 cars waiting to get out of the Sainsbury's car park. And with all the developments that are going on in the area, there'll be more traffic to the Saver Centre because Sainsbury's is the largest grocery supplier in the area. And people getting to IKEA and Dunelm will have the same problem. the setting to the ANOB, the hill in lots of places is higher than the ANOB behind it. They were saying there'll be glimpses of the development from the A4. That is a gross understatement, because that survey was done in summer, and in winter it will be even more evident. This development will be seen, as the land now is seen, all over the Kennet Valley, not just on the A4 and the M4. There's a big dip at the bottom of the hill on the ground levels, and the developers have actually said that they will have to tier the houses because it is so steep, it doesn't respect the natural slope of the hill and harms the rural aspect of the countryside. The setting to Pinsent's Manor will be totally altered. The final question that's raised is there clear evidence to indicate that there is a realistic prospect that 138 dwellings will be built on the proposed allocation? If it's included in the local plan, I can't argue with that. The answer is yes. But on average, all the planning applications have taken nearly 3 years to process, and the last one had nearly 3,000 letters opposing. Generally, the population has increased substantially, but the infrastructure hasn't kept up with it. Schoolmasters are standing up at meetings and saying their schools are full. When asked about the situation, the Education Department said the population was decreasing over the next few years and there was no need to increase school places. If this is so, why do we need more houses if the population isn't increasing? And with the increase in population, how can they justify this statement? There's a severe lack of infrastructure to support more development in the area. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And as I said, I've got your written statements as well, so I'm familiar with some of the things you just said from that. Okay. Town, do you want to come back on any points or say anything about this from your side of?
Yeah, thank you, sir. And I'm conscious as it isn't a Section 78 appeal on the previous planning application, and the matters for you to assess relate to soundness of the plan, clearly. Just a couple of points that I'd like to correct as sort of statements of facts, really, and comments that have been made this morning so far. There is still a matter of disagreement in terms of the number of units proposed to be allocated under the policy. In fact, you will see that in our site deliverability form, we included a recent master planning study, and taking the figures proposed rather than half and half as the indicative map indicates in terms of developed and non-developed, because of the requirement for large buffers and landscaping features, green infrastructure. In fact, in that study, it's closer to 75%. The figure is 75% assessed as non-developed and 25% developed. And the capacity of 165 units was at 35 dwellings per hectare on that developed assessment.
Well, I'm struggling to understand why you can't agree on maths. It's just.
I think it just relates to the extent of the amount of the site proposed to be developed, I think.
Okay. Right. Okay. And so anyway, leaving that aside.
Right. Okay.
Do you want to say anything about the sort of the provision of the green infrastructure?
Yes.
What that would do in terms of existing access rights and public rights of way, and what the benefits may
Yeah,
be.
yeah, absolutely. So, it's worth noting that somewhere between 60 and 75% of the site will remain undeveloped and part of the green infrastructure. There's a substantial community parkland proposed, the retention of public rights of way through the site, and the provision of a new north-south route, which is actually currently used informally by members of the public rather than the public right of way that follows the northeast corner of the site. So that would be dedicated in conjunction with discussions that we've been having for a number of years with the Public Rights of Way unit at West Berkshire Council. Because of the setting of the location of the site in the setting of the AONB, the parameters in the draft policy have been under discussion, and we're comfortable that we would be able to provide the necessary buffer to allow passage for wildlife and the connection between the adjacent areas of ancient woodland in Withy's Cop and Oliver's Copse. So all in all, rather than a loss of green space, what we're actually proposing is a creation of access to a substantial area of public community parkland, which would be protected in perpetuity and gifted to another organisation to manage, either the Parish Council, West Berkshire Council, or a third party organisation, and that would be agreed through the planning process. If I could just turn to highways and transport matters.
What you do on the sort of the public open space community park, just to be clear, the map that's been revised, has been suggested to be revised, the public right of way, statutory public right of way, cuts across sort of from the southwest up to the north, to the east side, yeah?
Yeah, in fact, there are two public rights of way. It's difficult. We had some discussions about the base map. There is another public right of way that runs around the northeast corner of the site. That's still quite difficult to read from the indicative map.
But the new one, the top part of the northern part of the site, which would be created as public open space, would also have within it a formal public right of way.
Yes.
But if there's public access to it anyway, I mean, that's
correct.
But the point is, this would all be public open space, and it would be landscaped and improved. Existing trees, etc., would be
improved. There would be some discussion as to how it would be managed, because it has some habitat value, and we would want to support that. But there wouldn't be. It's not intended for the site to resemble the recreation ground.
There's a formal recreation ground, so it'd be more of an informal.
Absolutely. So that's right.
Area. With rights of way through it.
Correct, and managed in a way that supports the ancient woodland and the passage of animals along wildlife corridors, etc.
So that would be that part of the site. And then, so the area that we developed would be basically be contained by that to the northeast, Vincent's Lane to the west, essentially, and the commercial areas to the south, and the recreation ground to the southeast.
Correct.
Yeah. So how would you respond to the sort of, how does that relate to the existing, urban area of Tilehurst, Calcott? Isn't it just a separate freestanding estate that's divorced from the sort of local community?
Well, it's adjacent to the retail and commercial areas, and the revised settlement boundary in that part of that site, in that part of Tilehurst and Calcott. It's a few minutes walk to bus services, to the large Sainsbury's Saver Centre, to IKEA, as we've already heard. So it is adjacent to the built-up area and therefore appropriate for development.
Well, it's adjacent to the retail park. I mean, people who wanted to go into Tilehurst or Calcott from these houses, obviously it's a public right of way, but I mean, it would. Well, they may have to walk if they're gridlocked in their Pinton's Lane for several hours, but if the only way is through the retail park. But I mean, is it realistically a sort of walking distance to the local facilities in the settlement? other than Sainsbury's and, you know, the retail units there?
I think it absolutely is realistic walking distance to both Tilehurst and to Theale actually, and I've walked myself a number of times between the station in Theale and the site, and that's about a 25-minute walk, which is quite a long walk for a railway station, but it is within striking distance. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So right, fine. So locationally, you say it's suitable, and the council's basically accepting that as well in terms of that. So I understand that point of view. Notwithstanding the previous applications that related to a settlement boundary defined in a previous plan, etc., which obviously can be changed if the council wishes to do so. Okay, so let's move on to the traffic. Do you want to respond to the points that have been made?
Yeah. I think without going over old ground, the reason why one of the principal reasons why the last application took a long time to determine was the number of detailed traffic modelling exercises that we conducted in conjunction with Mr. Goddard and his team, and indeed external advisors who advised him on the robustness of our traffic model. It's worth saying that unusually we have modelled the traffic on Saturday afternoons because of the fact that the retail park is busy at that time, and actually, and for our benefit, the flows of traffic and the amount of trips generated by a residential development are almost in direct opposition to when the peaks for the retail hours are. So in the morning peak, when we would generate traffic leaving our site, that's not a time when the retail parks generate traffic in. But this is the reason why Mr. Goddard was very keen to ensure that we assess the impact of the development on the surrounding highway network. We looked at queue lengths in some Ms. Goddard's smiling as well. We looked at queue lengths in some detail, and overall, and it was accepted that there would not be a severe impact. Nobody, as a result of our development on the surrounding highway network, nobody's denying that the network isn't busy, and it will be subject to stress at times, but our development will not cause a severe impact on the surrounding highway network. The IKEA itself has a number of challenges, notwithstanding the fact that it's designed for left-hand drive vehicles, and we have right-hand drive vehicles imposed upon it. So next time you get stuck in an IKEA car park, you might muse about that, sir. But first and foremost, and were there the severity of impact on the surrounding highway network, and there's no concerns about highway safety. And you will recall that you asked Mr. Goddard these questions earlier on in the hearing sessions.
I'll get the council to comment in due course, but so just being clear then, so in terms of when you've got a housing development, we're saying that the most traffic coming to and from that will typically be at what times? Early in the morning and later
in the morning peak and in the afternoon peak, yes, and they don't generally tend to coincide. There was some coincidence with the afternoon peak, I think, but not in a way that gave the council any concern, or indeed our modellers any concerns, either in terms of impact on the junctions or queue lengths.
Okay, and that's because, is it because of the different times mainly, or is it because of the amount of traffic that currently uses this system and the proportionate increase? It's a relatively small proportionate increase.
Exactly, we were in the low percentage figures in terms of additional traffic generated on the network, particularly on the Saturday afternoon, which is the time of stress as a result of IKEA. In fact, from memory, there's an hour, but something like between 1 and 2 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon is a particular time of stress, and in that time we generate very few movements out of the site.
And the times when there is gridlock, which does occur occasionally?
It would occur, there may be an accident impacting on junction 12. You know, it's not going to be as a result of our development, sir.
No, but would that be, if that were to happen 2 or 3 times a year, is that a reason for not having homes in this location, I suppose, for those future residents?
Absolutely not, sir. And people would be purchasing the homes free in the knowledge of where it is and with the access to the site, because partly they would know that it's well located to the strategic highway network. If they are overly concerned about that, then they might wish to purchase a home elsewhere, but we're confident that commercially it wouldn't impact on those decisions.
Yeah, okay. And in terms of, you referred to the severe impact test, which is the test in the national planning policy. If you've got a at times severely congested network and you're adding incrementally to it, what's your interpretation of the national policy position in that?
I think,
because some people would say, well, it's already severe.
Yeah.
So you're just anything making it worse is making it more severe.
I understand the argument, sir. The question is that the issue is here that it isn't actually all that severe, and it's been well tested. Our modelers, in fact, have run the same model for a number of other developments. Our site was included within West Berkshire strategic traffic modelling previously, and we actually impact the system very little.
Okay, I think, fine, thank you. Anything else that you wish to say then about, I think you've agreed with the council that the policy wording now, as in the latest version, the only point of disagreement is about the number. Yeah. Okay, understood. Although I don't understand the maths of that. Right. John Laurie, is there something else you wish to say?
Yes, there are actually 4 footpaths on the hill, number 13, 14, 15 and 20, which is being diverted at the moment because the upkeep, there are stumps and people would fall over the stumps on footpath 20. So the developers aren't arguing with that, to be fair, but instead of 2 footpaths, there are actually 4. And the councillors who actually live in the area are the ones that are saying that the area is gridlocked, and it's the bank holidays, and it's about 15 or 16 days that the traffic could actually exceed the 70 cars waiting to get out of the car park, Sainsbury's car park at that time.
Right. Council, do you want to come back? I mean, Mr. Goddard, is there anything further you want to say about, you've heard from town's point of view, we've talked about it before. I mean, is there anything further you want to add or respond to any particular issues that have been raised?
I can do, just to state what the local highway authority's position was, including at the time of the previous planning application that was submitted at the beginning of 2019. I agree with Mr. Bodkin there that the proposal was modelled thoroughly, and it took some 2.5 years of traffic modelling to get to a place where we as highway officers felt we could support it. Originally, the planning application came in with 265 dwellings, and that, in my view, didn't work. The increase in traffic queues was just excessive, and therefore the local highway authority objected initially to the planning application on that basis. The scheme was then reduced in size to 165. And we then took the view that any increases in traffic were not considered as severe. And for those that don't know, the word severe is in the National Planning Policy Framework, paragraph 115. You can only refuse a planning application if its impact on the highway network is severe. And we felt from the figures produced by the traffic model, which did include all committed developments in the area, those approved and those allocated, plus traffic growth ahead, that the impact wasn't severe enough for us to recommend refusal. There is very clearly a significant retail offer in the area. And there are some days of the year where it gets congested. But we took the view that it's not enough days of the year, 15 to 16 days has just been mentioned. Even that, at 365, we took the view as highway officers that wasn't enough to sustain a reason for refusal at appeal. And we as highway officers continue to take that line. In fact, it could be argued over the last 5 years that maybe the retail impact would have lessened. There have been significant changes since COVID came in shopping habits. Much more shopping is done online. And it would seem that there are less incidences when the IKEA car park, there are issues with it. There were issues when it first opened, but that was largely due to the fact that they didn't quite build it as to plan. But in recent years, it seems to be less of a problem. So any new planning application going forward, should this be allowed, should be complete with a new traffic model with new traffic surveys to update the situation as it is now. And that's the position of the local highway authority on it.
Okay, thank you for that. That's helpful. So I think just to summarise from my point of view, the reason that the impact would not be severe, notwithstanding the fact that there are occasions, 15 to 16 a year or whatever, where there is heavy congestion in the retail park and getting out onto the road network, is that the percentage increase that would be caused by the residential development would be relatively limited at most times.
Yes, that is correct. For instance, on a Saturday between 12:30 and 13:30, I've got the figures here. You'd be looking at a total of 19 vehicles in and 19 vehicles out. And that's what you'd expect from residential development at that time of the day. So yes, there are existing problems there 15 or 16 days of the year, but this development of 165 dwellings, just in our view, does not make it anywhere near worse to say that the impact is severe.
Yeah, and the issue of, well, there are times where there will be long waits to get in and out. Well, they're not sufficiently frequent, or at particular times where it would be such an inconvenience for future residents that it would justify making it an unsuitable location for development.
That is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Okay. Understood. Thank you for that. The Parish Council.
Yeah, just a couple of comments. I think it's worth noting that that at the two previous planning meetings on the last application, and I accept Paul, I remember Paul's, I was at that meeting, incidentally. I wasn't a member of the committee, but I was at those meetings as a representative of the Parish Council. But councillors took a very different view on the traffic, and I can see Paul agreeing with me on that. And I just would like to remind people that at both the district and the Eastern Area Committee, a very, very different view was taken on those traffic points. And I'd also like to add, I know I'm repeating what I said before, there is, of course, the planning permission that's been given to the to the manor house in the Pinson's Manor planning application that's going to add to the traffic.
The care home.
The care home.
Yeah. Okay.
And I haven't heard that particularly mentioned. I dare say that perhaps has been taken into account in these more recent assessments, but that's going to generate more traffic. And there is increased use. I mean, I checked this week myself. The business units in the office park have increased considerably. There's far more traffic going into those office parks. Now, I agree that's probably not going to affect the weekends a great deal, but it's an indication that there is increasing traffic flow in that area.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Goddard.
Just to add, yes, members took a different view to officer advice. That is their prerogative. I retain the views that we had, and whether we were to defend it at appeal, I think is rather doubtful because I don't think it met the severe test. The care home opposite, we assessed that planning application recently, and previously it was a hotel. So that would have generated its own level of traffic movement. So I didn't think that the care home actually increased traffic what was there before. But anyway, any new planning application would need to take account of, with fresh surveys and things like that would cover all these things going forward should the site be included.
Yeah, okay. But you're sufficiently confident that, notwithstanding the fact there would be that further survey work, and there's been a lot of survey work in the past, that the principle of the allocation is acceptable because that survey work is likely to show that the impacts wouldn't be severe.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. For the reasons
I have to
you've
say,
outlined.
for the reason I've set out, I'm still confident of that.
Thank you for that, Mr. Goddard. That's helpful. Yeah. Final comment. Yes, of course. Do you want to put the microphone down a little bit?
Thank you. No, Princess Manor didn't generate any traffic for 2 years because it's been disused until the planning application went in. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else that you was to say from?
No, thank you, sir. I think we've covered everything.
Okay. Anything else from anyone else on this one? Council, any final comments? No. Okay. Well, thank you for that. That was helpful discussion. As I say, we've had a discussion about it before. I've got a lot of information about this site. So, and there's also the context that I've described earlier for me to think about. I think what we'll do now, it's just after 11, so I think we'll have a break before we move on to the subsequent sites that we're talking about in Thatcham and Pangbourne, and indeed the broad location for growth north of Newbury, which I noted with some interest has got a new name from Paulus Anderson, which I rather liked actually. So I don't know if the council wants to officially christen this Blognon or not, but it's an acronym that actually can be presented as a word. So in that sense, I don't mind. But anyway, let's have a break there, and we'll come back at 25 past if we could, please. your seats and we will resume. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Right, so we'll move on now to the next item on the agenda. Well, we've got three sites, CA 12, well, we've got two allocations and three sites that I wish to talk about, CA 12, CA 17 and CA 16, which adjoin each other off Heath Lane, Bowling Green Road at Thatcham, Coldash. So again, we've got the revised policy wording for the two proposed allocations that was published on Monday. So we'll go through those in due course. The same process that we've talked about has been gone through to identify these as being, the council identified these three areas of land which adjoin each other as being suitable. Two of them proposed as allocations in response to my action point on the basis that they're also known to be available. The other one not proposed as an allocation because not confirmed to be available. That's still the same position, is it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. I suppose one question I would have is the way that the two allocations are proposed defines a developable area by reference to, I think it's a contour line, and beyond which there's a significant area of land that would be in the control of the developer and that would be landscaped and retained as public open space, either informal probably, but probably with public access. But the point is it would be retained and landscaped, and that would maintain a separation from Coldash village and a landscaping area to safeguard the setting of the AONB. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Well, we'll talk about the three sites individually. I suppose the first question I have, I may have asked this before, is would it not make sense to actually think about it as one allocation and have a comprehensive development that would achieve a better form of development?
We did consider that. I'm aware that the promoter of the Hennick Park site is quite an advanced stage in the preparation of a planning application. So we've kind of had regard to that, but we have considered linkages between the two sites in the forms of, say, pedestrian and cycle access.
So you think that could be achieved? The three sites, well, the two allocations, and indeed the third one, if it became available, could be developed in a satisfactory way, albeit if it was done at separate times by different developers through different planning applications. You think the way the policies are worded would achieve that? If necessary.
Yes.
Okay, so there's no need to delay it and to have a comprehensive development and a master plan for the whole area or anything like that. Okay, thank you. Right, so, okay, well, we will treat them as individuals then, and we'll go through each. But can we just start with the parish council's point and the recently made, as the phrase is, neighbourhood plan? You've provided a copy that is in the examination library as exam document 56. So this went through the process that neighbourhood plans go through, and it was went for a referendum, and it was thereafter made. And the parish council referred to policy CA1 within it, which I've got before me now, and it's the sort of the text before it has a map which shows some green gaps between Ashmore Green and Coldash and Thatcham. Now, the map there that shows those gaps, they are the same gaps as defined in the West Berkshire plan, is that correct?
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. And the allocations that you are proposing, presumably not by coincidence, but they avoid those green gaps.
They do, yes.
So when those gaps were drawn, it was in the knowledge that the Healer sites were not allocated, but they may potentially be developable, or was it just a coincidence?
It's just coincidence.
Or it reflects the landscape and the physical features?
Absolutely, yes.
So the way the green gaps were defined for the reasons of topography, landscape and land use, they didn't encroach into the areas that are now proposed as allocations.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So you're satisfied that the developments that are now being proposed wouldn't encroach on the key green gaps that are defined in this plan? Yes, okay. And therefore, they wouldn't, from the council's point of view, subject to the landscaping and the layout, etc., they wouldn't lead to emerging or you know, undermining the separate identity of Thatcham and the two villages.
No, not at all. I mean,
No.
So the sites that we're proposing to allocate, they've been subject to landscape sensitivity assessment, and that's included in the examination library. It's reference LANF, I think, but they concluded that development could be accommodated on part of the site without without that feeling of the merging of the settlements.
And in terms of the issue about, well, this neighbourhood plan's just been through a process, and when it was examined and it was found to meet the tests, and therefore it's been subject to referendum and passed. There's a policy CAP1, which says that development should be focused in the settlement boundaries. This wouldn't, and development outside the settlement boundaries will only be supported where a number of criteria are met, one of which it is on sites allocated for those uses in the West Berkshire Housing Sites Allocations Development Plan, which isn't the case, or its successor. So that's that. I don't know whether that was a policy that the parish council wanted in the plan, or is one that the West Berkshire Council wanted to be put into the plan. Oh,
it was the parish council.
Right. It was acknowledging that there could be the strategic plan, or the West Berkshire plan may need to allocate additional sites at some point.
So considering like the need for a neighbourhood plan to be in general conformity with the development plan policies.
Okay. So anyway, from your point of view, would you be satisfied? Well, actually, because of the way that policy is constructed, there isn't any inconsistency between what you're now proposing and the recently made neighbourhood plan.
That's correct, yes. And our policy DM1 does set out exceptions as to when development will be allowed outside of settlement boundaries. And one of those is allocations within the local plan review. And our settlement boundary review criteria does set out that boundaries will be withdrawn around sites that are allocated.
Yeah, okay. What about the fairness point, though, that was raised where, you know, you've got a parish council gone through this long process of preparing a plan. It does what it does. And yes, it acknowledges that this could change, I suppose, implicitly there, but it's recently made. And obviously the intention was not to allocate sites in this location. So.
Absolutely. Well, we completely, accept their feelings. I mean, these three sites, although they're within Coldash Parish, they're actually adjacent to Thatcham, and our strategic policy SP1 is clear that the focus for growth will be on Thatcham.
Okay, yeah. So that combined with the way that policy is constructed, it's almost like, well, yes, but there could be a time in the future, the way that Thatcham has to grow, that there could be further development on the edges of the settlement boundary.
That's right. And also the NPPF is clear that strategic policies also have to make sure there is sufficient supply of homes to meet the housing requirement.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you. In terms of the work, so I'm focusing now on CA12, Hennick Park, the site that's allocated for 225 dwellings, which I think is Nexus are promoting. Is that right? The right one?
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah. Okay. So in terms of the policy wording in the latest version that was published on Monday, the blue highlighted and the yellow, well, the yellow highlighted was proposed slightly earlier, and the blue highlighted was recently proposed. What remains in agreement or disagreement with the site promoter?
We're more or less in agreement. I think the only point is in relation to the widening of Heath Lane and Bowling Green Road. I mean, we have made a change just to state it might be required subject to further more detailed transport work.
Let's just have a look how it's expressed now then. Because I saw, yes, that was an area that was raised as being problematic potentially. Was the concern from Nexus mainly in landscape terms rather than the cost or the difficulty of it?
I think there are two things, sir. Firstly,
Yeah.
the work we'd had done historically on this site through the appeal and the transport modelling, I think didn't require a widening, and there was some concern about existing vegetation and loss of trees. I think the more fundamental point is that the policy is almost preempting something that might come out of a subsequent study. So we don't know it needs to be widened. The transportation assessment will identify whether it's needed or not, and we see that wording about indicating that there might need to be a widening a little bit superfluous in the policy. But at the end of the day, the transport modelling will show what it shows.
Yeah.
And that will determine the application.
Whilst you don't think you need to refer to it at all, the fact that it's now basically saying, well, this will be determined through the transport modelling,
it'll be what it'll be, sir, ultimately.
So there's no particular harm in it being expressed as the council now suggests.
No, sir. No,
Whereas before, if it presumed that the word widening would be required, you would have a concern about that because...
I think our concern was going to be that if there's a policy requirement to widen it, then when an application comes in,
that would be the first.
That would be the first port of call for the manager. But now we're happily comfortable with the wording.
Okay. Right. Okay. Thank you. Just one thing that this was made by, I think, Mr. Pike yesterday, actually. The policy here and in the next one we're going to look at refers to the site being developed in the setting of the North Wessex Downs AONB, National Landfill, and sets out a process for the LVIA and policy SP2. It was mentioned yesterday in connection with North East Thatcham. I don't think there's a similar sort of policy in the North East Thatcham policy. So I'll just flag that up. I mean, I'll probably include an action point on that, but that was I read it again this morning. I was thinking, yes, that was right. Sorry, is there anything the council wishes to say about this proposal and this policy wording before I open up to see if there's any?
Nothing further to add.
Okay. We've dealt with the oh yeah, just the other question that was raised. I don't know if it's been resolved now.
Mr. Davis, can I speak on behalf of Caldas Parish Council?
Yes, I'll bring you in a minute.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Yes. Yeah, don't worry. The issue of the amount of public open space on the site, obviously, there's a considerable area to the north of where the development will be. I think there was an issue raised about all the quantitative requirement for under DM40 for a certain specific amount of open space. Would that be included within the developable area, or would it be separate on the landscaped area? Or is that just something that could be sorted out?
Yeah, so it'd be both, and it's been resolved. And we've included a modification which is highlighted in yellow.
In yellow or blue?
I'm sorry, blue. Sorry.
So this is G part 3, is it?
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so it's a little more open. It's green infrastructure and public open space will be provided, taking into account the requirements of DM40. So it could be both or either. Right, fine, okay. And the contribution to the 5-year supply from this would be 150 from 2026 to 2031.
That's correct, yes.
Yes. Okay. But it would then continue and be completed by 32, 33. Okay. Right. I'll bring the parish council and the town council in a minute, but is there anything else that Nexus want to say about this proposal or this allocation?
No, sir. All the issues that we raised in our statement, we resolved subsequent to that. So we're comfortable with the wording.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. Let's start with the parish council, Caldas Parish Council.
Thank you. I fundamentally disagree about what we've just been hearing, represented by West Berks. The reality is that this is the closing of the gap between Thatcham and Caldas. That's not my words. That's the words of the inspectors and indeed West Berks on all the occasions when these proposals have been put forward before. All of them turned down, and not only turned down by, well, we've objected, West Berks have have said that's the main reason to object. It went to the inspector, it was objected, also to the Secretary of State. There's a huge need for that separation between our communities, and whatever one says to do with policy, on the ground, there will be a convergence of the two. And it's everyone's policy for that not to happen. What I was saying earlier to do with the neighbourhood development plan, well, we'll look at that in a second from a legal standpoint. But actually, we've worked very, very closely with West Berks. In my experience, because I've been at Parish Council for 12 years, across 12 years on these sites. And West Berks have always had the same attitude, which was, no, these should not be developed. And there were several reasons. For instance, flooding is one, and that doesn't seem to have been dealt with. There's, within what's being put forward here, there's no infrastructure for schools, healthcare, transportation, none of those things. Why? Because this has been suddenly plucked, purely and utterly in a kind of, we need some more houses. And the NDP's trampled on, the local community is trampled on. And well, you know, we all understand houses have to be built. This is pretty well among the worst possible places. I mean, if you add the Thatcham development, it's probably, we did a calculation when we were doing the NDP, about 800 extra traffic movements going up Cold Ash Hill every morning. Obviously, they won't all of that. They'll go on rat runs around the various villages. So none of this has been assessed as part of this application. Environmental risks have been ignored. The strategic, as I said, the strategic flood risk has been ignored. Why? Because this is just grabbing something and whatever. On the NDP, and I'll be coming in a more positive note in a second, I promise. But on the NDP, there's case law that says it can't be just swept away. This is part of the Localism Act from memory, I think 2011. And we don't, you know, we wanted to work with West Berks. The fact that we have done for the last 7 years and put this together, and that they've suddenly brought these things forward, I feel that our councillors believe that to be a serious betrayal. But here I am saying, let's not develop these houses or whatever. I don't believe that. I believe our community, West Berkshire, desperately needs more houses. I don't disagree with words like 5,000 houses over the next 15 years. The answer is to find the right place. Now, our view as a council is that there's a perfect place where the infrastructure is all there at the junction of the A34 and the M4. It's all there. One could easily build 5,000 houses there, work with developers, get the community involved. That is, we're not being negative about this. We're actually saying, yes, we know we need more houses. We've been through the process of showing how then it's not right for Cold Ash, but we're now trying to, and it may be not part of your brief, but trying to say, well, why not put them there?
Okay, well, that isn't part of my brief. I mean, if there is a scope for 5,000 homes at A34 M4 junction, well, that may be something the council wishes to consider through a future review of the plan. It isn't something that I want to spend time on now. What I am interested in is whether you think that the policy CAP1, which acknowledges that sites may need to be allocated, but in a successor document to the site allocation development plan, West Berkshire, does that not mean that this actually is not, this proposal would not be inconsistent with that policy?
It's completely inconsistent because it's happening a few months later. You know, we've been through this process.
This doesn't say, you know, in so many years' time or whatever. The policy wording, I'm reading it.
Well, maybe it'd be for others. I mean, to judge what an NDP's durability is. But if an NDP's durability is for a few months, then I have a suspicion that not many people are going to be queuing up to do NDPs, which is part of the Localism Act.
In terms of,
there has to be durability to this. Mr. Fieldhouse.
Okay, I understand the process point and the fairness point. Can we just look at the specific then in terms of the green gaps that are defined in your neighbourhood plan that are the same as in the West Berkshire plan?
Yes.
They would not be encroached upon by this development. Is that factually correct?
I think that that's on the margins of factually.
Well, it is or isn't. I mean, there's lines on the map.
It's on the margins. No, I've seen these developments over the last 12 years and how they encroach.
Well, no, I can only go on the plans that we've got.
Yes,
So
I understand.
you're not disagreeing that the proposed allocations avoid these green shaded areas in your plan?
I think they tiptoe round.
Yeah, the tiptoe round. Okay.
Yes.
Let's settle for that. Understood.
Yes.
And in terms of the plan that is proposed for this site, the way that you've seen the plan
Yes.
with the housing development would be basically contained on the area along Coaldash Hill and Heath Lane, with the top part being retained as an open space or landscaped. Would that not prevent the merging, as you described it, of Thatcham and Coaldash and Ashmore Green?
Our view as a parish council is no, it's the encroachment for West Berks to be saying that it doesn't close the gap. It doesn't close the gap to the last 50 metres.
No.
But it certainly, closes that gap much closer together than it is at the moment. And that green space, Mr. Fieldhouse, is absolutely crucial to that to that separation.
And is that because of, in terms of practically, as you drive up Coaldash Hill, the sort of the length of the frontage there, and indeed with access points or walk and cycling access being up the hill, but the main road access would be down at the bottom. But you'd say that because of the way it extends up Coaldash Hill,
yes,
visually it sort of leads to a much closing of that gap.
Yes, every inch of that gap is crucial. And my measurements were that we're losing quite a lot of it. The idea that you say that you're keeping a length that's something like a football pitch or two there, I think is not the point. The point is, it's a bit like saying, oh, we'll just build a few houses in the green belt here. It's not really going into the green belt. It's just, no, these things are sacrosanct, and not sacrosanct because we're peevish or whatever, but because they're really important to the way that the communities feel. It's not that we're against Thatcham, but we believe in the separation of those two communities, as does the policy. So any encroachment there, as I say, West Berks has many, many times in the past said that is sacrosanct. We must keep that gap. So it's not just us. Then, as I say, the idea that we, as a community, just have these things imposed on us with no consultation, that I think is crucial. And I think it may be, when others look at this, that they will see it as crucial.
Okay, thank you. Understood.
Okay, I may want to come back.
Yeah, okay, we'll just see what the Thatcham Town Council have got to say, and then we'll see if there's any further comments.
Thank you, sir. So in my professional career, I had spent a large part of my time analysing studies produced by other stakeholders. And I found it was very useful as a first question to consider which came first, the conclusions or the methodology. And unfortunately, I think that the study on the strategic gaps, the conclusions came before the methodology. At an earlier stage, Thatcham Town Council commented that there wasn't a logical justification for excluding Bucklebury from the strategic gap, apart from the expedient factor that the council wished to develop North East Thatcham. The gap between Thatcham and Coaldash and Ashmore Green gives the appearance of a gap with actually allowing development to take place largely unconstrained. We've already heard that the gap between Newbury and Thatcham already contains something, the Lower Way site, which is already developed, but it's still part of a gap preventing development. So I suggest that you take that into consideration in assessing this. Moving on to a couple of specific points in our comments on the specific proposal, we commented that we believe that the sustainability appraisal was flawed because it gave a positive rating for education. And one of the key factors is that the trajectory for this development would mean that it would be completed almost before Thatcham North East would be started. And therefore, it's very unlikely that any any secondary education facilities would be available for the residents of this site. And as we've already discussed, the secondary education for Thatcham is already oversubscribed. So there is a sustainability question, and we would rate that seriously negative rather than the positive factor, because you can only walk to the school if the school has capacity for you to enter it. On the question of the widening of Heath Lane, I think the origin of this was a comment made by Thatcham Town Council at an earlier stage in relation to traffic for site SB17, because we found that the HELAR for this site CA12 includes this provision, and the caveat that was in the HELAR is not there, that it said that if North East Thatcham were to be developed, the widening of Heath Lane would be required. So that's the reason why that was originally justified in the HELAR, and that has, I believe, been transferred into the policy without the qualification on the assumption that North East Thatcham would be developed. I may come back to other points in response to other comments made by other people, sir. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Nexus.
Thank you, sir. Just coming back on a few points of accuracy, really. I think the representative from Caldash Parish Council referenced numerous inspectors and Secretary of State's decisions about the importance of the gap. I think we need to, I appended the Secretary of State's decision to my hearing statement, sir. It's very clear that the only issue that this site was deemed not acceptable at the time of the local plan inquiry was on housing land supply. All the other issues were deemed to be resolved. We had a statement of common ground with the council before that inquiry, resolving all the issues bar at the time a policy conflict. The issue of the gap was discussed at that inquiry, and neither the inspector or the Secretary of State raised concerns about the setting of the AONB or the gap. The other issue about the gap is when Caldash Parish Council originally submitted their neighbourhood plan, this site was included within as a gap, and the examiner recommended or said it had to be removed from the neighbourhood plan. So that process, the examiner identified the retention of the two gaps to the east and west of our site, but recommended the deletion of the gap on our site.
The reason the examiner recommended that change to the neighbourhood plan was an inconsistency with the existing adopted plan that defined a gap, or this emerging plan that defined a gap.
Well, so at the time, the adopted plan didn't have those gaps.
Didn't it?
No.
So it was a conflict with the emerging West Berkshire.
Emerging plan, and I think just the way the land functions in terms of its role in separation, and just to reiterate the point of closing the gap, if you're travelling along Caldash Hill going northwards, you've got built development to the east all the way up to the 95-metre contour. So the Thatcham urban area extends up to the 95-metre contour. Our proposed development and the policy identifies that as a limited development. So we're effectively extending the current northern extent of Thatcham. So the actual fully open gap isn't diminished by this development. And more importantly, what we're proposing is effectively a gap in perpetuity through the public open space we're providing on the site, which will either be in management company or dedicated to the local authority or Caldash Parish Council. It's a question we're asking through a public consultation at the moment. So they will have a permanent gap, which isn't protected by policy, but it's protected by effectively its land use and its ownership.
In terms of the sort of visual, as you say, as you drive up Caldash Hill, on the right-hand side, as you're going up, it's developed, and it would be to the same extent on this side. There's quite a significant hedgerow along the road, isn't there?
Yes, there
which
is, yeah.
from the junction of Heath Lane at where the road access is shown on this map,
Yes.
that hedgerow could be retained, presumably as you drive up. The houses wouldn't have to open out onto the road. They could be.
It'll be, in fact, our proposals are showing a landscape and tree, there's existing tree planting as well at Coldash Hill. Our proposals showing landscaping along that boundary. So
visually, as you drive up the road, it wouldn't be, I mean, the houses would be there behind the trees and the hedge, but it wouldn't be that the development would be opening out onto the road at that.
Certainly in time when the landscape establishes more, it'll still be effectively rural in character.
Okay. Okay, understood. So yeah, understood the landscape and the gap issues. Anything else you wish to say?
No, sir. Thank you.
No, okay. I'll go back down to Thatcham Town Council, and then I'll come on to you in a minute.
Thank you, sir. A specific comment about the setting of the AONB. My recollection is that was added to the NPPF at the 2021 revision, so I don't know the timing of the appeal that was referred to. So, and also the protection of the AONB or National Landscape has been enhanced in the Levelling Up and Regeneration Act 2023. So a historic decision that didn't take account of that may no longer be relevant because of those changes to policy and legislation. Thank you, sir.
Parish Council.
Very briefly about the gap. You probably remember it. It's kind of on the left it's free, and on the right there's some development. And then as you go further up the hill, it switches, and it goes to the left is the development, and to the right is the open countryside. That's why it's not really about there being stuff on the right, and then it's okay to put it on the left. It is because it's those steps that make it work as a full gap. And you've obviously travelled up there, and you'll have seen that. And I would suggest that is really crucial to stay as a green gap.
The village extends further down the hill on the left-hand side as well, as you're going up.
Yes.
There's a difference in terms of the settlement. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Town Council again.
Thank you. I'm reminded of a planning appeal which was rejected for a site on the corner of Hambridge Lane and Bath Road, which was in the strategic gap. And one of the key considerations there is that a similar situation occurs between Newbury and Thatcham, that the settlements are offset on the two sides of the road, which makes it more important to maintain the totality, because otherwise, if the infill is effectively continuous, although moving sides of the road, it effectively breaks the gap far more.
I understand the point, yeah. Thank you. Okay. Right, anything else that anybody wishes to say about this particular site? We'll come on to the adjoining site in a minute. No, anything the council wishes to say?
In relation to the point on education, and that we've discussed kind of education as part of the North East Thatcham proposals, and our education team are they're content that suitable solutions can be found.
Sorry, and suitable solutions can be found in the short. I mean, the trajectory for this development, if it were allocated, would be that it would start fairly soon and be built by the early 2030s. Yeah. Any school provision on North East Thatcham would be beyond that, I think. So what you're saying is you think that a solution for secondary and primary school provision for this development could be found in the shorter term.
And these schools sit within the catchments, I think, of the Trinity and Downs schools, which are accepting further pupils.
Right. And if there were a financial contribution needed to increase capacity, that's not explicitly referred to in this policy, but it's in the other policies in the plan.
Yes.
And that would be assessed at the time, depending on capacity and whatever.
Yes.
Okay. But anyway, your education colleagues don't see it as being a showstopper in the short term.
No.
For school provision, primary and secondary. Okay. Thank you. Ms. Lambert.
I wanted to respond to Councillor Pike's point about the NPPF being strengthened in relation to the OMB and including the setting of the OMB. Just so that you're clear, sir, the Council's current core strategy policy, ADPP5, does refer to the setting of the OMB. And the Secretary of State's decision did specifically conclude that there would be no harmful effect on the setting of the OMB. The date of the decision was 2017. So it was before the 2021 date, but the council's development plan policy includes protection for the setting of the OMB.
Okay, so it was an issue and it was considered by the inspector and the Secretary of State, and they concluded that it wouldn't be harmful to the setting of the OMB. Okay, thank you. Right, any further comments on this one? We'll move on to the adjoining site. Yes, Mr. Pike.
Yeah, as you've only had oral information about the education, I draw your attention to the data that is in the appendix to our most recent submission about the number of admissions into the schools. And we understand that our understanding was that certainly Kennett's beyond capacity and that Trinity was at capacity. But if we have that, there is the data in our representation on the number of admissions. Thank you.
But we've heard the council say the Education Authority are satisfied that this development could be provided with sufficient capacity. So
just saying that as you had a qualitative statement, I was drawing your attention to quantitative data. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. Right, let's move on to the next allocation, which is the Regency Park Hotel. We have Regency Homes here who can comment on this. I'll ask the council first, though, if there's any things it wishes to say. I mean, in terms of the revised policy wording, has this been agreed with Regency Homes?
So we've made some changes in relation to the points they raised in their written statement. One thing I think Regency Homes do comment on is they think the kind of green infrastructure that we've kind of shown on the map could potentially be smaller, but ultimately that would be for the planning application stage. And obviously there's a requirement in the policy for a landscape visual impact assessment.
When you say the green infrastructure, this is the area to the northern part of this site, is it?
Yes.
I'm talking about the right one here, aren't we? We're CA 17, aren't we?
Yeah, 17.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the contour, sorry, the boundary of this that's shown as a landscape buffer is the same line as it is on the adjoining site, isn't it? I mean, it just follows the same contour.
That's right. Yes.
And the point of disagreement may be that Regency Homes think
it could potentially be smaller.
What? Did it extend further up the hill?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Oh, well, I'll let them comment on that in due course. But the same. A lot of these policy wordings the same as the one we just discussed. Are they entirely consistent? There's no. I think Mr. Pike, you may have raised an issue about whether there's any inconsistencies. I don't know, but I couldn't see any significant ones. I don't think.
No.
No. And there's some connections between them in terms of the blue arrow is a footpath link that would between the two.
That's right. Yes.
A site walk and cycle link between the two developments.
That's right.
And that matches up on the other two. And in terms of the access, whether it's from the hotel road or would be new, it wouldn't have a new road onto Bowling Green Lane. It would be come off through
the existing access, and we've proposed that on the basis of advice from our highways team.
So the hotel access from the road is satisfactory, and then you can take a road off that somewhere. I mean, it's indicative where it's shown here, the precise layout, but that would be achievable onto this. So that would then be separate. There wouldn't be a road link from that development to the CA CA 12 one.
No, they wouldn't. No.
So in that sense, they are separate developments and may come forward at different times. And in terms of the timing of this, if it were allocated, it would be completed within by 2030, I think, is your estimate. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Anything? Yeah. Regency Homes.
The amendments to the policy. We would like a little bit of flexibility or understanding from the council that it's not always possible to have an access of a residential estate via another commercial operator. So at the moment it's all under the one holding, but in the future that may change if the residential comes forward. So, and that will come down to detailed transport studies as part of the planning application. Likewise, the buffer to the north, we understand the principles of that, but there are quite a lot of targets within the policy in relation to open space, AOD heights, which we think all will go into the mix of a planning application to enable this site to be an optimised housing site of minimum 45 dwellings. So it's really just sort of setting a marker down that we're willing to work both with the adjoining landowner and the council to make the best use of this brownfield site.
Okay, so whether it's a brownfield site or not, I don't know, but
well, the council have confirmed that in a pre-app in 2016.
Okay, fine. Sorry, I wasn't.
I wasn't making presumptions.
No, okay, fine. But in terms of the capacity for 45, you're not disputing that as being an approximate figure that is appropriate to work to.
Well, I mean, 45 dwellings is kind of arbitrary because that's not 45 flats, 45 houses, and you know when you look at areas, and so we anticipate that the site could probably deliver more than that, but that would be down to detailed planning application justification based on the LVIA and the townscape considerations that the council want to work with us on.
Okay. So you say you're broadly happy with the policy wording, but you say that there may be a situation whereby access would be wanting to be provided separately. You mean a separate road access?
Well, it will come down to, you know, there's an access point from Bowling Green Road. I think essentially what the policy talks about just basically says, if I just grab the actual wording, it talks about access from Bowling Green Road, and then there's a comma and states by where is it? Via the hotel, I think it says. I think we just need to take that bit out and just to confirm that the access from the site will be from the south, from Bowling Green Road. The details of how it's accessed will come via a planning application and detailed transport reports and tracking of that.
But the council might not want another access off Bowling Green.
We're not saying it might not be, but it might be that the access changes in relation to the hotel to enable independent access to the residential site. It won't necessarily be via the hotel.
Well, it might have to be if the council want it to be.
No, what I'm saying is the hotel and the residential developer may decide that they can create an access. The hotel might come off the residential. You know, it might change completely how that one access is used. So it's kind of like it's assuming that the residential is going to come via the hotel.
Yes.
Well, what might happen is the hotel might come via the residential using the same access point. So what we're saying is the point is we know this site is going to be accessed from Bowling Green Road. We're not saying it's going to be a separate access, but what we're saying is please don't assume it's going to automatically come. 45 units are not going to go via the car park of the hotel. There might be something that happens between the existing operator and the residential, and all we're saying is the policy at the moment is making an assumption that the hotel and the car parks are going to stay as they are, and I don't think that's right.
Okay. Do you want to comment? I mean, does the council have an in principle objection to another separate access road coming off Bowling Green Road? Or it's the council's policy that no, there won't be. It needs to use the existing access that currently serves the hotel, either for landscape reasons or highway safety reasons, or both.
I would say no objection to additional access, subject to geometry considerations and sightlines considerations. At the moment, we don't have sufficient information to say, oh yes, that can be achieved.
Okay,
but
so
as long as those things are achieved, I would not have objection to additional access onto Bowling Green Road there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for the clarification. So from a highway safety and engineering point of view, in principle, it could be if it's deemed to be safe and suitably designed, etc. In terms of landscape reasons, is there any reason why that would not be acceptable?
No.
No, so potentially provided at.
Yeah.
Okay, so there could be some flexibility in the way that it's phrased rather than being as it is drafted. So understood. So I'll give some thought to that.
Thank you.
Okay, and anything else, Regency? So you alluded to. I thought I'd read somewhere there was in your trajectory site deliverability form. Let's have a look at this. I wonder whether I'd made a mistake in what I'd written down, but reference to 150, is that right?
sorry, I keep
Right.
one down. There was a pre-app in 2016 where we were looking at potentially doing a nursing home and circa 50 units, so it was the whole site. So if you counted the 85 beds of the nursing home and all that count came out to 150, but this allocation relates to the open space attached to the hotel, not the hotel building itself.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so yeah, that's, you broadly content with
about that.
45 as the starting point. It wasn't thinking about some high density flatted.
No, we know we've got that 95 AOD to work within.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Right, okay. Thatcham Town Council.
Thank you. So on the question of consistency between the policies, I think there is an inconsistency between the policies on the way that vehicle access between the two sites is described, which needs to be resolved. As a very local resident to that site, while the highways might be agreed in principle, I think in practice it could be challenging. And there's one part where I think there is a consistency that there shouldn't be, which is that I'm a bit doubtful that a site of 45 needs to have a requirement for internal walking and cycling links. It's likely to be a single cul-de-sac, and therefore there shouldn't be a requirement in the policy for. I can understand for 225 houses why that would be something that should be in the policy, but for 45 houses that seems to prejudge the layout somewhat.
Well, my understanding is that it would provide a link to the adjoining allocation.
I think there's a wording internal as well. So
I see.
If there's a requirement for internal, if it is internal, and the wording is it's got so many revisions, I can't immediately check, but I would suggest that internal links is probably not an inherent requirement for 45 houses. Thank you.
Sorry, in terms of your inconsistency regarding vehicle access, could you just explain
I
what
think
you
the
mean?
one I can't remember offhand. One of the policies refers to the option of one site being accessed from the other vehicle by vehicle, but the other policy says that the link is only walking and pedestrian. I think it's given as an option, but I think the point is one suggests an option and the other one appears to preclude it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anything from Caldash Parish Council do you want to say about this particular one? Is it the same comments as the previous one, or less of a concern than the previous one?
Less of a concern, actually, because it's not closing the gap if I keep going on about it. So no real comments, no.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, Regency Homes. No, nothing, okay. Right, just before we move on to, sorry, Paula Sanderson.
Sorry, I go back to the green infrastructure. As I said yesterday, the green infrastructure framework is not delivered yet from West Berkshire Council, and the nature recovery networks work, which is being conducted in association with other Berkshire councils, is still underway. And my concern with all this area is that nobody's looking at nature and where it's going to go to and where it's going to come to. And it may all come up in individual planning applications, but again, we haven't got cumulative impact if we don't have master plans. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Just before we move on to Pangbourne then, the other piece of land that's not been confirmed as available, this is CA 16.
That's right.
So if that were to become available, you're not making any assumption about this contributing to housing land supply in this plan. But it was assessed as being suitable, again, with a separate vehicle access using the existing access?
Yes, there's already an existing access to that site.
Yeah, and this would have capacity for, remind me, 16, is it? This is 45 as well, is it?
Yes, 45, yeah.
Yes, a similar scale to the other one. Okay. But again, if that were to, well, we can't really preempt what it would be, but I mean, if these two allocations were made and the site came in, I suppose it could be a windfall site potentially. Because
that's right.
If these were allocated, you would draw the settlement boundary around these?
We would, yes.
It would be along the southern part of the buffer, the landscape buffer, would it?
Yes.
And that would bring in this CA 16
It
site
would,
into the
yes.
settlement boundary.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so whether it's allocated or not, it could become available. It's okay. Caldash Parish.
Very briefly, I haven't been briefed on that particular site, the creek. Maybe I've been looking the wrong way, but I don't think so. What I would do here, through you, is to appeal to West Berkshire to consult us, to keep us informed. All this has come as completely out of the blue. And as a parish council, it's not just not fair. We've got things to contribute. We've got positive things to say, as well as negative, of course. We've got positive things to say. So through you, I'd like to appeal to them to actually start consulting us a lot more so that we know what's going on. So thank you.
Okay, understood. Thank you. Right. Before we move on then, anything else on Thatcham Caldash before we move on to back over to the other side of the district? Right. So let's move on to Pangbourne Hill. Again, this is the fourth of these additional proposed allocations. This is Pangbourne Hill, which we've discussed at some length actually previously, when it was an emission site, but it was one that had been deemed as being suitable earlier on. So for the same reasons, and there was some discussion about capacity and layout, etc. So where have we got to on this one? Have we got agreement between the site promoter and just going to bring that piece of paper again, the council on the proposed wording changes?
So on the wording changes, in terms of the landscape work, we've made changes to the points made in the written statements from Nexus to remove F3.
What there was pointed out as being potentially duplicating the previous point. There was some disagreement around the capacity in the 25, but I think you've sort of accepting as a starting point that you can work with that. I think Nexus
yes, that's fair saying.
Yeah. Okay. So again, this is another one that's got a red line that covers an area around half of which would be provided as a landscape, and it'd be a similar thing, would it be? The settlement boundary would be drawn along the developable area when. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
And we had discussions previously about the visibility of the site in the landscape, etc. So I don't think I've got any other further questions about that. No one's picked up any particular detail issues. Anything further you want to say from next point?
I think it's only just to acknowledge really in this forum, sir, that we're aware of the observations made by Pangbourne Parish Council relevant to the site, and they are about as observations. We note them. I think just for the record, my client's more than happy to work with the parish council as part of this if this becomes an allocation. And I think some of the other concerns here relate to things that have or haven't happened associated with the development to the south, one way or another. And again, we're happy to discuss with the parish council. I don't think it's anything my client can do about that. It's not a site they own anymore, and there are issues raised about compliance of the developer Millgate Homes with the Section 106 agreement. It agreed with the council. Obviously, that's between those two parties to make sure that the obligations are met. And clearly should be. So I don't think we can comment further on those points, but just wanted to put on the record my client's willingness to work with the parish council to come forward with a scheme on this site if it's allocated in due course.
Okay, yeah. Just on terms of the policy requirement for internal walking and cycle routes linking to existing routes, what does that mean in practice? Where would the accessibility by foot or by bike be?
That it would link through the development to the south, and then onto Sheffield Close, exactly, and then onto Pangbourne Hill.
So a bit further down the hill.
Yes, it covers. There's a route through that.
I see.
Through that development,
so it wouldn't
front and onto Pangbourne Hill.
Yeah, so you wouldn't have to go back along the access road.
No.
Yeah, I see. Okay. Fine. Okay. Yeah, parish council.
Thank you, sir. I just would like to raise 4 points. You've got them all in. We've written to you from our clerk, but it is an ANOB. I'm sure you've taken that into consideration. We've had 30 houses previously built up there, and as the gentleman kindly pointed out, there have been through Millgate some things that never happened. It's never been properly adopted as a road. The car park has never actually been handed over either. And we do have some issues as a village, again, which is all we've pointed out to you. We have a lot of speeding on Pangbourne Hill, always has been a problem. The junction at the bottom is an absolute bottleneck. We have several schools in the area with school buses, both private and state. We are a service village, which of course adds a lot of pressure onto our village, and this is going to only add more pressure onto the village. And flooding, we've had a lot of problems with Pangbourne Hill flooding, surface water, etc., going down that hill. None of them have been addressed, even though on Pano 1, Pano 2, all these items were pointed out to the developers and the council, but nothing has actually happened, which is kind of concerning. And there's only a 6-inch sewer that runs down that hill. So all these houses have got to actually go into a 6-inch sewer, which ironically was exposed this week due to a new gas installation down the bottom of the hill. So I've actually got pictures of that. The third point I'd like to make is affordability. These houses that were built over in Sheffield Close are all at least £500,000+. Most of them are exec homes at the 4 or 5 bed with 2 million plus. It's probably kind of not what we really need in the village. We do need housing, I accept that. We've got a station that feeds London and Reading. I totally accept that, but we need houses that can actually be afforded by people. And my final point I'd like to make is, it's a dangerous the gentleman mentioned cycling and cycle paths. There are no paths to that. I don't know how that happened in the past. I was the councillor at the time, but we have a cemetery at the top of there. And it was always agreed that there would be a path to the cemetery. The actual path is up a huge staircase that zigzags up onto there, and then it doesn't actually meet up with a path. It meets up with the road. There is some pavement further up right at the top, but it doesn't meet up there. So children, mobility, anybody in a wheelchair, it's an absolute disaster. And we see people walking up Pangbourne Hill, can you believe? It's an absolute horror show. I live just opposite on the other side, and people are regularly walking up the hill with their shopping, with their wheelchairs, with their push chairs, etc. So all I would say is, going back to what somebody already made, if it does go ahead, we very much would like to be consulted, and we'd like to make sure that these concerns that we have at the parish council get considered. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. That's helpful to hear. Do you want to, is any of those points you want to, just on affordability, I suppose there's two issues about this. In terms of affordable housing provision, this would be one that would provide 40%, would it? Or?
Yes, I was going to make exactly that point there. And if it provides any comfort to the parish council, there are obviously policies elsewhere in the plan on housing mix and affordable housing, and this scheme would need to comply.
Yeah, so in terms of policies, leaving aside the affordable housing element, the policies in the plan about housing mix would be not all big 4 or 5 bedroom homes. It would be a mix of smaller ones and
it would have to comply with the plan as a whole, absolutely, including those policies.
Okay, whatever was provided or not provided at the Sheffield Close development in terms of affordable homes, this plan is clear about what would now be required, and that's what's okay.
Absolutely.
And in terms of going back to the pedestrian cycle access, so the link through the Sheffield Close down and then onto Pangbourne Hill, from there down into the village, that's where I think the issue is. But that's something that, is probably beyond your ability to do anything about. Whether the Highway Authority has anything you wish to say about that, I don't know. But
yes, shall I defer to Mr. Goddard, who I think put his microphone on?
Thank you. When the original residential development of 35 dwellings was provided, it was provided on the basis that there was an acceptable pedestrian link to existing footways on Pangbourne Hill. And you can look at the Google Street View, and there's this ramp going down from the site. But it was all designed to standard. It was all a suitable pedestrian access, which connected to existing footways on Pangbourne Hill. So as a local highway authority at that time, we were happy with that development of 35 dwellings and were content that it did have acceptable pedestrian links. And the addition of this development, in our view, doesn't change that view.
So you're saying that if you use that ramp down from the existing Sheffield Close development, that comes down onto Pangbourne Hill?
Yes.
And links with a footway on Pangbourne Hill?
Yes.
Down, all the way down to the junction in the village centre?
Yes.
Okay. There seems to be a disagreement there on. Oh, I see, on the other side of Pangbourne Hill. Yeah.
Across the road, because there is no park between there and the corner of the A314. You're going to have to cross the road and then come back across. Thank God I'm, past push chairs, but if I had push chairs or a wheelchair, it would be totally unacceptable. This ramp is pretty thick. I don't know why they did it, because you could have increased a few answer that, but I don't know why you didn't run the path all the way up to the main access. That would have been much easier.
Unfortunately, it was too steep. There are certain gradient thresholds that we need to meet for pedestrians and users of wheelchairs. But I agree, once you get down the hill by the church, there is only one footway on one side of the road, but there is a footway. And it's the best that can be achieved and for the pedestrians that we're expecting from this.
Yeah, okay. Understood anyway, thank you. I mean, I think a lot of what you're talking about is the limitations or the inadequacies of the existing road layout, which can happen in, exactly old villages. That's sometimes the case, isn't it? So, understood. Right, thank you. Anything else on this particular allocation then before we move on? Right, so that brings us to the end of those four. So that was helpful discussion. And as I said earlier, we've got a context that I'll need to think about in terms of the process by which allocations are added at this stage, which brings us on to another element of the council's proposal to boost the housing supply or potential housing supply identified in the plan. So this is the identification of a broad location for growth north of Newbury, and the policy wording of policies SP1 and SP12 would be modified to refer to this, and there would be a map. Sorry, would there be a map? I've got a map with some shading on for defining the broad location of growth. Was the proposal that would go into the plan? I can't remember. I've got it in front of me.
It would, yes.
Yeah, so that would be in there. So it'd be defined, and presumably on the key diagram as well, it would be defined
Yes.
In a way a bit similar to the area at Tilehurst, I suppose, was shown in the course strategy, was it?
Yes, and it would go on the policies map.
It would go on the policies. Oh, it would go on the policies map with a boundary, would it? Or would it go as an indicative sort of blob?
No, it would go as an indicative
blob
blob.
On the key diagram?
Yes. Yeah, on the key diagram, yeah.
Yeah. And potentially with if there's potentially with an inset map like you produced here on an ordnance survey base potentially. Anyway, we may come back to those. Turley have some other ideas about clearer allocation lines, no doubt, but we've had an initial discussion about that. Anyway, so what's proposed is that this would be identified as a broad location, and there would be reference to approximately 650 to 800 homes here, and that is part of the fundamental strategy in this plan about Newbury and Thatcham as being a focus for growth and identifying it's a continuation of that same approach.
It is, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So then your statement, further matter statement published on the 10th of September proposes some amendments to the wording to clarify the approach to how land would be brought forward, which basically they're intended to clarify the purpose of identifying it and the process by which specific allocation would be made. So the amendment to the modification would say that sites will be allocated through a future review and update of the plan, and that individual sites within the area should not come forward in isolation before they're allocated. So this plan would retain the settlement boundary, and this would be a broad location beyond it. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah. So it's okay. And that would be in the reason justification, that statement about sites not being brought forward before they're allocated, rather than in the policy. But
Yes, that's currently to be in the supporting text for policy SP.
I suppose if the settlement boundary excluded it, that would be clear-ish from other policies in the plan anyway, wouldn't it? If they,
Yes.
if they were still.
Yeah.
Okay, well, leaving aside that technicality, the principle is that it's identifying this broad location and that the allocations would be brought forward through a review of the plan. Fine. But the trajectory assumes that 650 dwellings could be completed as part of the land identified in this plan. Your trajectory, your updated trajectory includes a 650 figure, doesn't it?
Yes, it does.
Because the rationale, I suppose, for that would be that the plan would be reviewed and updated and the new allocation would be made before 2041.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. But the policies in this plan are not allowing, they're not identifying or allowing development in that location, are they?
We're saying that would come from the future review of the next review plan, yes.
Right. So I suppose that, okay, well, whether the inclusion of 650 in the land supply identified in this plan in the trajectory is justified, well, maybe talk about that and maybe talk about it again later when we talk about the overall supply. But even more fundamentally than that, why should this broad location be singled out for something that is going to have to be considered in a future review of the plan, particularly in the context of where it looked like we're going in terms of new NPPF, a new standard method and scale of development that may entail. I mean, aren't you preempting something that needs to be looked at through a future review of the plan? This is sort of premised on, well, we've got this plan and the review will just be a sort of a tinkering and update with it. Whereas potentially it could be something more significant. I mean, we've heard discussions about different fundamental spatial strategies in finding suitable sites. And I know the council's letter itself referred to a more dispersed approach in future about, development around other towns and villages. So, I mean, is this preempting something that actually you're going to have to look at through a review of the plan and maybe a new plan, reasonable alternative spatial strategies to accommodate the new scale of development that you may be asked to accommodate, et cetera, et cetera?
We are trying to give certainty that through the existing spatial strategy that we have got sufficient certainty for sites to come forward. We have a supply basically to go to 2041. Yes, as part of the review of the plan, we would be considering a new spatial strategy, potentially, yes, but we want to give certainty at this stage.
But it doesn't provide certainty, does it? Because one, you're saying you won't give permission in this broad location in this plan until it's been reviewed. But the review and the update may actually have to be a fundamental rethink about the district's spatial strategy in the context of a housing requirement that I think is over 1,000 based on the new standard method. I'm not saying that's what it'll end up. It's draft, but I mean, that's what it is. And it seems to me that is quite a significant change potentially that would have to be taken on board. So either I can see that this broad location is broadly consistent with what this spatial strategy is. That's fine. It comes back to Turley's point, I suppose. Well, if it is, why can't we just allocate this land now? And that's part of this plan and that provides clarity and certainty. Or it's just that line that we draw and say, well, this submitted plan does what it does. It may not identify sufficient land to meet the requirement that is in it. But that is something that has to be picked up and looked at in a future review. Whereas we've got a bit of a halfway house, it seems to me, here.
Yes, as I say, we were trying to provide certainty, but if you conclude that actually the broad location is not needed, then...
Well, if the council were to say, well, it's a broad location, and the policy is, well, we haven't got sufficient certainty that we want to put lines on maps and allocate definite sites now. But in principle, development coming forward subject to X, Y, Z in this broad location in advance of a review of the plan. I'm not saying you should do that. I'm just saying I could possibly understand that. Or I don't know whether it's something that ought to just be left and not preempting a future review.
I think the council's preference would be to not include the broad location in the plan rather than piecemeal development come forward. I think we are clear that the area needs to be considered holistically. There are a number of issues, significant strategic issues that would need to be taken into consideration. The highways, education, landscape, ecology, flood risk, and it needs to be considered properly.
Now, okay, understood. Yeah, so you need a proper planning approach to it, and however much Turley may say, well, actually, we can demonstrate our particular site of X number of homes could be brought forward. Even if you were persuaded that were the case, you still wouldn't want to see that in isolation because of the bigger implications for looking at a broader, bigger scale development in the general area. And that wouldn't be something that you'd want to do in a piecemeal way.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, understood. Thank you. That's helpful. Okay. Anything else you want to say? I mean, I'm throwing these thoughts out there because these are things I'm going to have to scratch my head and think more about, but I'll get views from others. So let's start with Turley on this.
So that was quite insightful. Thank you for picking up the numerous points that I've obviously made in our submissions. I think the first point has to be, the council was saying they want to give certainty, but ultimately they're not for residents, for the developers, fundamentally for the plan making process. The council need these numbers as you've identified within the trajectory. Otherwise, they are not meeting the housing needs of the district. They therefore fall foul of Para 22, the NPPF, in terms of the 15-year plan requirement. So if they don't include this, as now seems to be suggested perversely, they're going to have to find other sites in my.
Hang on, let's think about that this afternoon.
Let's deal with that later because that touches in the afternoon. The difficulty, sir, is around this review and the additional wording that has appeared in their statement that we weren't party to discussions on, and Gerald Eva here as well, and I'm sure they've got a view on this as well. Ultimately, could be regarded as prohibiting an application until that plan review is undertaken, and that doesn't make any sense to me. And I'm afraid there's a bit of history here as well, sir. And I, probably like other people in the room, was sat in this room back in 2011, 2012 for the current core strategy examination. And just to draw your attention, sir, policy CS1 of the existing core strategy actually required the council to undertake a review once the new SHMAR was published and review the core strategy within 3 years. That didn't happen. There was a new SHMAR published in 2016, increased the council's housing requirement from 525 a year to 665. It didn't happen. We all can see the trajectory in terms of the government's emerging approach. That suggests an annual requirement of 1,057 dwellings per year. So the need for housing and the certainty and the delivery of housing is going to become ever more important. Our submissions are quite simple, sir. They should be identified as an allocation now. The council have the information. The SA itself says that it's fine, apart from working through the transport issues, which, as you've seen, we have tried to do. That could be easily resolved. I would have thought in a matter of weeks, hopefully. The technical information is already before the council for our site. I believe Gerald Eve have done the same. It all feels a little bit obstructive, unfortunately. This is a site that is entirely in accordance with the spatial strategy. It probably is more so than it is more so than any of the sites we've spoken about today. And it should be identified positively as an allocation at this stage.
Just remind me of, when you say the site, when the broad location that's shown on the map that the council has, you're saying that all of that should be allocated, or just the bit that the Donington New Homes is,
So my client's interests are either side of the road, as you'll have seen in the submissions. The idea of a broader location is one entirely of the council's own construct. We have said consistently that our client site can come forward alone. The council have, for whatever reason, said it needs to be part of a broader allocation. And I believe that is largely driven by a desire to get a road off of the Vodafone roundabout. I think that's the only reason from what I can tell. North Newbury, as you'll have seen, has been subject to recent developments. They're actually determined to appeal. The location has been established as a sustainable location for growth. The idea of this location has obviously, border locations come from the council themselves, so not from us. We're not averse to it, I should say, but the submissions we've continuously made through the EIP is our site is able and capable of delivering early within the plan period without the need for unidentified infrastructure.
okay, understood. I'll come over here and then I'm going to work around that way. So yeah, Fairhurst Estate.
Thank you, sir. I think given the sort of late addition of this to the process, Mr. Burden's entirely right in what he's saying. I've taken a slightly different view in trying to look at this in terms of how do we deal with what's before us at this moment that would need the least fettling, if you like.
Good. I like your approach
in terms of where that would get us. And you'll have seen the wording that I've suggested as a change. The issue with that, which Mr. Burns identified, is that would rely upon the council doing what they would be saying they would do if they signed up to that sort of wording that would essentially compel them to an early review that was actually undertaken and which would be brought forward sooner if delivery, for whatever reason, starts falling behind somewhere else. So that's the difficulty that you've got, is that I think most people around the table are actually saying that, yes, in principle, this is probably a good location for some additional housing, but we don't know what the detail of that looks like because we certainly haven't done that next level of detail. So that's the challenge I think that we've got, is to how do we actually make that work in a way that actually allows development to come forward. We did a lot of work on our land as part of the planning application that came forward some years ago for the development that has been constructed north of Vodafone. Some of that environmental work actually looked at the broader site. So there is work out there. It's not before you because we don't quite know what that detail of that broader area might look like, but some of that, it has been undertaken historically for our land holdings. And I know work has gone on in respect of the other land holdings. So there is a position that one could come to that says, get on with this now and actually do some of that work sooner. And that would give you, sort of going back to yesterday's discussion around environmental assessment and what does all of that mean, that could be done sooner. But also that would necessitate both my client's land holdings and other land holdings actually coming together and saying, well, this is what we think really a notional scheme would sort of look like at this point. And I think there's a balance there in terms of, this isn't a site that's being identified in the plan for actually coming forward ASAP. It's being identified as a backstop for something that will help the council if it needs to be helped sooner, but nobody knows exactly when that might be. And that just gives us all a little bit of a difficulty, I think, in terms of exactly how we put the wrapper around this area. That's probably not that helpful, but that's where we are.
Yeah, understood. Well, I think you did have the sort of compromise wording position, didn't you, about applications being brought forward if the review hasn't been completed and the plan updated.
Yes, and I think, you know, particularly speaking with other people this morning, you know, the parish have got some very valid concerns about not wanting anything to be piecemeal. And we don't want that either. You know, we were sort of forced into a situation some years ago of bringing something forward that was granted ultimately on appeal and ultimately without the council really sort of contesting it when it came to the inquiry. But that's not the world that, you know, any of us want to be in. We want to be in a world where something is actually properly planned.
I won't put you on the spot to say whether you agree or disagree with Turley on it, but I mean, I think you're sort of suggesting more that you understand the council's point of view about a needing for a kind of comprehensive view of the broad area rather than picking off individual development sites.
My
just
position,
because one might be more advanced and available at a particular time.
This isn't a site that's going to come forward immediately.
When you say a site, do you mean this
the broad location
on these on the map?
Certainly in terms of a holistic development, that is not about to come forward with a sort of, you know, rabbit out of the hat planning application in 6 months' time or something like that.
But parts of it could.
Parts of it could. Parts of it could. But that wouldn't get us to a sort of comprehensive view of what development to the north of Newbury ought to be.
Which is the council's point.
And that's the council's point. Yeah. So I'm slightly sat in the middle of them going, I understand both of those. The land is available, but we need to have a mechanism by which it actually is capable of coming forward properly and appropriately. And, you know, a decision's got to be made there as to whether the council, you know, whether they are actually saying this afternoon now, I should say, whether they are saying, oh, actually, we're not that bothered about identifying this. I think that's something that has got to be considered in the broader housing land supply position. But I think ultimately this entire broad area will come forward for housing. It's a question of when and actually how best that's managed.
Well, the best way it's managed is through a plan-led system, isn't it? I mean, that's what the planning system we have in this country, whether you agree with it or disagree with it. I mean, that's the process, isn't it? So, yes. Okay. Thatcham Town Council.
Thank you, sir. So I struggle to reconcile the aspiration of the council of West Berkshire Council for certainty when there's insufficient evidence to make a firm decision. As from a Thatcham perspective, we are painfully aware of the Vision 2050 document, which defines broad areas for future consideration. If those are compatible or consistent with what's being proposed here, is there any need for anything further beyond the vision document? If they are not the same, then what is the evidence base for the difference? Thank you.
Okay, Shoreham, Donington Parish Council.
Thank you, sir. I sympathise with the comment just made by my colleague from Thatcham Town Council about not seeing what the designation broad locations for growth achieves. The parish council didn't understand it when it first came out, and I'm afraid nothing that's been said this morning has actually cleared the fog around it, for me at least. But having said that, through our written submissions, we have intended to achieve what was our aim of showing that we're not against development per se. We understand fully the need for new housing. I'm a new member of the parish council. I only came to live in Newbury 2 years ago. It moved out from outside to a new house on the Donington Heights development. So, of course, it'd be ridiculous for me to say that I'm against the need for new housing. We fully understand that. But what we've tried to achieve through our written submissions is show that when development takes place further north of the existing Donington Heights, Shore Valley developments and moving across eastwards towards the northern end of Shore Cemetery, either side of Long Lane, is that we must have a planned approach which includes drainage concerns, flooding, access to Newbury town by foot and by bike, which we don't have from the existing new estates without crossing busy roads. And also the need for facilities on those estates, because where I live, which is the southern end of Donington Heights, is really limit for sensible access on foot or even by bike to existing shopping and other community facilities. If we're going to have further development north of those, which I accept at some stage is very, very likely, we do need community facilities, shopping facilities, possibly medical GPs facilities on those developments. Otherwise, life becomes very difficult for people living on them. Anybody living in Newbury now knows, for example, we're very, very underprovided with pharmacies, and the more the population grows, and particularly on that side of Newbury, the worse that will get. So our general approach is we're very, very keen to discuss with any people interested in developing in the blog area in future in a constructive way, but it must take account of those concerns about infrastructure, which we've laid out in our written submissions.
So I think you'd be against any sort of individual allocations, you know, being made now. It's needing to look at it. I think you're saying the same thing as the council and Gerald Eve here, that it's a sort of comprehensive approach that's needed to sort of plan all these things out in a comprehensive way. Yeah?
Precisely, if we can achieve that, yes.
Okay. Paula Sanderson. Oh, could you put the microphone on? Okay.
In support of the views from Gerald Eve and Shaw Cumdorrington Parish Council, the local super output area, LSOA, for this broad location of growth is quite large, and within that there are no GP facilities, there are no pharmacy, I'm struggling to think of a shop actually. The road network is not good. And within that broad location of growth, you have CA15, which is the Turley site, and then you have SCD4, which is represented by Mr. Eve here, and they're at different stages. With respect to the hydrological, the geological, sorry, I'm not very good with logicals, those aspects, back in 2008-9, it was always the council's intention to have North Newbury development area. And even within the strategic flood risk assessment, level 2 at that time, they put together a document with recommendations for spatial planning and then development control recommendations, which, because it didn't come forward in the last plan, have not been taken through. But we do need to have proper holistic planning across those downlands, because we have to have surface water management plans and we have to have a better understanding of the groundwater. The groundwater and the surface water this winter has meant that downstream we have had impacts for 6 months from the water coming off those sites in different areas, where Turley drains into a lane, which is a dead end with bungalows and bedridden people, was underwater for 54 days out of 90. Over at the other side, we've got the spout ditch. The River Lambourne has broken its banks. It's impacted the spout ditch, which SCD4 would feed into, and that is, the channel capacity is not sufficient. So, and these would have been considered exceptional circumstances in the past, but they're not now. That this is becoming the norm. We saw it gradually when I look at all the data, and gradually through from 2014 flooding, gradually, the volumes of water coming off those hills because of various reasons, including agricultural practices, mean that we have to have proper research across the piece in terms of flood risk to us downstream. When you also look at the DEFRA classifications for the lands, I did a screenshot of each one that popped up with something for that broad location of growth, and there are 28 different designations and areas of interest. including things for wildlife, like yellow wagtails, lapwings, things like that. So the ecological side of it has to be looked at holistically across the piece, because they don't live in CA15 and they don't live in SCD4. You've only got to go along Long Lane and see how many dead animals there are trying to get from, you know, CA15 over to SCD4 and for their feeding grounds. So I would be really, really disappointed and nervous if we had sites coming forward in this broad location where growth is accepted, because it's been on the cards nearly for 15 years, looking back at the documents. But we need it done as a proper master plan with a spatial and some, if anything is mentioned in this plan about this site, it has to have some clear policy and it has to have some clear statement of how it's going to be progressed in the more immediate term than something looking out. You know, the work's got to start now.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Understood. Parish Councillor, your nameplate's still up, is that, you know, okay, thank you. Right, Turley.
Thank you, sir. A couple of follow-up points, if I may. Obviously, there's a slight difference of opinion between us and Gerald Eve in terms of Mr. Davis's comments, because our site is immediately adjoining and contiguous with Newbury in that location, and therefore we are capable and able of coming forward immediately, and would seem to be a logical extension of the settlement. Although I've seen Mr. Davis's wordings don't take any issue with it in terms of that broad location. But I would say, listening to some of the comments, and the level of detail that exists regarding these sites, this broad location, is similar to what the council has before it for all the other proposed additional allocations that it's making. Our submissions have included flood risk assessments, ecological surveys. The master plan submitted with our Reg 19 reps show how access routes could be provided east-west through the site, if that was something that was required. And also note, obviously, the schemes that have gone already at appeal, so the Taylor Wimpey site and the Red Rose site, I think it is near the Vodafone roundabout, they effectively fill in that gap to the north of Vodafone as well. So I think that the reality is there is a need for this area to be located. It's common throughout the various documents, the SA process, everything, that this is an acceptable area. Our submission's always been that it should be firmed up at this stage. I also think there's a follow-up point, so I'm trying not to dive into 5-year supply scenarios here, etc., because it is a slightly different point. The reality is there are less units coming out of some of the identified outlets, and particularly Sandford Park East and indeed part of Sandford Park West we've touched on before. But effectively there are 355 units less in the Sandford Park development that's currently proposed.
We'll come on to all that this afternoon.
No, the reason it's important, sir, is that will have a bearing on the transport movements in terms of what happens around Shore Road and the Robin Hood Gyratory. And those units will not exist, and therefore there's capacity in the system in that location, which I think is where Mr. Goddard has gone previously. But you know, this work is capable of being done and resolved very swiftly.
Okay, just to be clear though, you're promoting the particular site that's on that's at the eastern end of the broad location. So are you saying that what could be done is your site could be treated like some of the other additional allocations, your particular one?
Yes.
CA, whatever it is, 15, isn't it? That could be allocated, and that could be separate from any sort of broader development potential on the land going further west.
Yeah, that's correct. So our work shows that that site could yield about 230 dwellings. It can deal with the technical issues. It could safeguard any future routes. It could come forward now.
And it wouldn't prejudice that.
There's no need for it. It's literally runs along Long Lane, sir. So there wouldn't be anything prejudiced there at all. And as we touched, no doubt, this afternoon on 5-year supply, and you know, it's an application that could come forward immediately, frankly.
Okay, understood. All right. just quick, I'm going to break soon because it is 1 o'clock. So just
with respect to Mr. Burden, his site actually abuts a cemetery and ancient woodland on one side, and on the other side, again, it touches up to nearly ancient woodland, and there is an old established residential area. But the split of either side of Long Lane and the problems with Long Lane, which Mr. Goddard is completely aware of in terms of traffic and flooding, I still say that we need to look at this whole piece holistically, because part of his site is to the west of Long Lane and abuts SCD4.
Yeah.
And that whole geology and hydrology has to be understood, because we have to have cumulative impact assessment. And sir, you were very kind to me and put extra wording in about cumulative impact assessment into CS6. So this is an ideal example of where we need it.
Okay, thank you.
Sir.
Thank you. Parish Council.
I should be very brief and just say that I hope that our written submissions have made clear that our concerns increase the further east we go in this blog designation area, and we're entirely in accord with what Ms. Saunderson's just said about her concerns, particularly concerning flooding, which is a very real problem each winter and even outside the winter in Long Lane.
Okay, thank you. Fairhurst Estate again.
I think just a final point, but not to labour it, but there's a lot of environmental information available in respect of our land holdings, which is as a result of the 401 units that came forward as part of the application that was allowed on appeal. So there is a lot of environmental information relating to the bulk of the broad area of search.
Okay, right. Thank you. Any final comments from the council in terms of response to what you've said in terms of the specific things or what I said earlier? You don't need to.
I was just trying to be helpful, really. I think it's encouraging that there seems to be a general sort of feeling around the table that the area should be considered holistically. And as I say before, our intention was to provide clarity through this plan. If it would help, we could go away and have a look at how we could increase certainty for potential development in this area.
Thank you for the offer, but let me think about it. There may be a number of options I'll need to think about, partly after this afternoon's discussion. Just to finish off on, that obviously the broad location is drawn around essentially a number of emission sites that they've been put forward through the HELA. There may be other bits of area that come forward in a future review for whatever reason that aren't being put forward now. Is there anything particularly different about Turley's site on the eastern end of the broad location, or you're equally firm that isn't all needs to be part of this comprehensive approach, that you can't pick that off and say, well, that's fine, we can just deal with that like the other allocations that we've suggested we've talked about today?
No.
It is part of, for the reasons that you've referred to, that there are implications, if that were developed, that need to be properly thought through in relation to other broader issues.
Yes.
Which are the things that you mentioned earlier about highways, education provision, landscape and ecology, flood risk.
Yes.
Okay, very quickly then, Turley.
Sorry, so I have got to come back on that because it has obviously been assessed as a standalone site and found acceptable in its own right. So it is different. And the technical issues, as I keep saying, are capable of being resolved. So it has been differentiated by the council as being deliverable now on its own.
Okay, well, I think we've gone as far as we can with that, but thank you. And as I say, we're going to look at this afternoon at the sort of the supply situation, just so I'm, revisiting that again before but as I said, I haven't come to a conclusion about what that supply would need to be either in terms of 5 years or overall in terms of reaching a conclusion about how to bring this examination eventually to a close. It's lucky we're not under the latest letter we had from the Minister about not allowing examinations to become protracted, and some reference to a 6-month extension. I'm not quite sure to what, but I think we've probably exceeded it. So, but I won't run that. I won't put that meter on now anyway, I don't think. Well, I suppose we could start the meter now and make sure that's... Anyway, thank you for your contributions this morning. It's 1:05, so I think what we'll do is a break now. We'll resume at 2 o'clock and move on to the two supply issues on the bottom of the agenda for the 5-year supply and the housing land supply for the plan period. Thank you.